Black.
Good evening. I hereby call to order the action session of the Board of School Commissioners for Thursday, September 24th. Would you all please stand and join me in the reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
to the United States of America.
I will note we do have two commissioners this evening participating by phone pursuant to Governor Holcomb's executive order and corresponding guidance from the Indiana Public Access Counselor. I'll remind my colleagues calling in to mute their microphones when they're not speaking to minimize any feedback or interference. And as we move through the agenda, I will make sure to ask each of you for questions or comments on any items on the agenda. Mr. Mulholland, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold?
Here.
Commissioner Gore?
Present.
Commissioner Moore? Commissioner Slack?
Present.
Secretary Collins?
Here.
Vice President Hawkins?
Present.
President O'Connor?
Present. Thank you, Mr. Mulholland. We'll now adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Reviewing the agenda, are there any requests for changes of the agenda as presented? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The agenda is adopted. Special recognitions. We do not have any formal special recognitions to honor this evening, but I want to, again, highlight the incredible work being done by Superintendent Johnson, the administration, and all of our teachers in particular, and the families and parents during this challenging 2021 school year, and the trying to create some sense of normalcy during a pandemic. I also want to thank the administration for their work during IPS week in uplifting the many great things going around in the district, even in the midst of so much disruption and uncertainty. Moving to opening comments, Section 3. Does any commissioner wish to offer anything, any opening comments this evening? Commissioner Collins.
I just want to thank and express my gratitude and my admiration of the teachers and leadership who have worked tirelessly to be flexible through this pandemic, and all the teachers who are teaching synchronously and asynchronously. I have heard your pain, and I don't know how you do it, but I think you're just a wonderful blessing to this IPS family.
Commissioner Gore.
Yes, Commissioner Gore.
I would just like to add to that, along with the teachers, and also thank our custodians and other frontline workers who are working tirelessly every day. And I know that their jobs aren't easy either, to try to keep our buildings clean and up to protocol. So I'd just like to give a shout out to our custodial service as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. Any other commissioners have opening comments?
This is Commissioner Slack.
Please
I
go.
would also like to add to that.
Thank you, Commissioner Slack. Moving to item 3, I'm sorry, item 3.2, public comment. To minimize the risk of exposure for members of the public sharing the same microphone at the podium, we'll continue to receive public comment through our online portal. The public comment portal was activated Monday, October 19th, and remained open until 4 p.m. today. We received one written submission, which is posted in Board Docs on item 3.02 and is available for review by the media and the public. Moving to the consent agenda in Section 4, are there any questions or requests to remove an item from the consent agenda?
Commissioner Gore, I do have questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Gore.
One question is, are we still renting out our building to the public? I did see something on there about the charges, but I didn't know if we were still doing that during the COVID.
No, we have suspended facilities rentals during this time. Is there a particular item you were looking at, Commissioner Gore?
No, I just saw that on one of the pages about the renting charges for the facilities, and that was the question that just popped in my mind.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
And then another one that I had was under general, under the general purchasing, the non-public township transfer of funds via Title I, October 2020, is a request to transfer funds to various townships for their instruction of Title I non-public students. Could you just explain to me? It might be something I know, but I forgotten. Example like Beech Grove, Brownsburg, Franklin.
Yes, Weston is going to respond to that question. Weston?
Yes, Commissioner Gore, the non-public transfers are for IPS resident students that are in non-public schools in those districts or in those locations. So that's something that we do on an annual basis. This is the way that we chose to report it to the board through a distribution that we're making to these other districts.
Okay, so there are students that live in our area but go to non-public schools outside of the area, and money comes through IPS to get back to them. Is that
Correct.
an understanding?
And that local district, for example, Brownsburg, if the non-public school is in the Brownsburg School District has the responsibility to provide services for that IPS student going to a non-public school in Brownsburg, and the districts share those dollars because they initially came through IPS, and we're sending them out to the relevant districts that are taking care of those students.
Okay.
And we have the same coming into IPS as well, that there's transfers in where there's, for example, a Lawrence student that is in an IPS boundaried non-public school, we would receive dollars as a transfer from Lawrence.
Okay, thank you. And there was just one more under grants. I'd just like to have an explanation. It was talking about the grant for the police study, and I just wanted to know what it would entail and what results were we looking for in that particular grant.
I will turn that over to Ahmed.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore, for that question. The grant is centered on
I'm
trying
sorry, but I
louder.
can't hear you.
I'm a little rusty. Thank you for that question. The grant is funding a research study that was initially started back in 2015, 2016 that was doing an evaluation of IPSPD. That study was completed, and over the course of conversations during late 2019 going into 2020, after conversations with the superintendent and navigating some issues with IMPD and IPSPD, we thought it was a great time to
President Mike,
reevaluate.
is he talking into a microphone? I'm not able to hear it.
Yeah, I'll ask him to speak up again. Thank you, Commissioner Gore.
Thank you. Okay.
Is this better, Commissioner Gore?
Can you hear that now?
It's a little better, yes.
All right. I'll project a little bit more. But ultimately, the goal of the study is to evaluate the policies, practices, and procedures of IPSPD through multiple lenses, which includes the racial equity lens, how IPSPD can have a positive impact on social emotional learning for our students, as well as impacting attendance, suspensions, and expulsion rates. So that's the ultimate goal of the study, and it's just kicking off, and we look forward to sharing more, not only with this body, but the public at large.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or items on the consent agenda? If not, I will,
Yes.
Commissioner Slack, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I had one for the personnel report. On the personnel report, it had listed that we had some resignations, about total 34 of them. And I've seen down there that we had a number of special education teachers that were listed on there. Are we filling those seats, or how was that? What's going on with that? Is my question.
Mindy or Warren, any additional insight on resignations in the special education department?
Oh, there it is.
Now we can hear you.
Sorry. Can you repeat the question? Is just around general resignations or?
There seem to be multiple in special education, so if we're noticing any trends or patterns in terms of resignations in special education.
Not, oh, God, sorry. Not at this time. I can go back and look, but nothing that was flagged from the staffing folks in HR for this personnel report. Nothing outside of the normal.
I think Commissioner Slack was asking, it appears that there are 34 resignations in this consent agenda. Is that out of the norm, or is that sort of in the normal window?
I can look, it depends on when they were processed, so they may not all be from like this month. But we do have higher resignation on special ed typically, but I can do a quick comparison from last year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions on the consent agenda? I will, one, take a motion to approve and second, and then we will go to a roll call vote on every item from this point forward this evening because of the electronic participation. So I would. Has been moved.
Second.
And seconded. Consent agenda. So, Mr. Mullen, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
Yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you. There are no board reports this evening, so I'll turn the agenda over to Superintendent Johnson.
Great, thank you, and good evening, everyone. Before we get started on our formal superintendent reports, I'm very pleased we have guests with us this evening who have some special news and recognition for the school district. So I will turn it over to Scott Martin for an introduction.
Good evening. Where'd he go? Lord, I can't find anybody these days.
While we're waiting, are you prepping for the Santa Claus season?
You like that? Yes, I am. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, all right.
It's a part-time gig. So in 2016, I took an idea to Dr. Farabee on saving energy, and it was called the Better Buildings Challenge. It's through the United States Department of Energy. So he agreed. We took it to them. Took about a year to get it set up, and then we made small incremental changes in 2017. In 2018, as some board members know, we brought on Synergistic. It's a national company that helps school districts and public agencies save energy and hopefully money. So we brought them on board in 2018. We just finished our second year of the program. And this is Dr. Randy Hoff with Synergistic. He's been part of the initiative here in the district since we began. And Randy's got a couple things he just wants to say to you, please.
I'm going to lose this too. Thank you, Scott. It's great to be back in front of the board. I was here in 2018 when the board hired Synergistic to do two things: to implement an energy conservation program that saved the district money and reduced energy costs for the district, but that also protected the learning environment. And we've had tremendous success in the 2 years since we've done that. We've saved about $7 million in energy cumulatively over that time. And we've done that by reducing energy cost or energy use 32% on a per square foot basis. So it's a significant recognition. We're very proud of it. And it's attracting a lot of attention. We've won 2 national awards, and that's what I'm here to present today, and that's what Scott mentioned. The first one is from the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy has a program called Better Buildings Initiative, where they reward organizations that reduce their energy consumption by at least 20% and then share their best practices nationally. And IPS, it's a rare thing for a school to get recognized by the Department of Energy. There were 2 school districts nationally that were recognized in 2019 and 3 that were recognized in 2020. And IPS was one of the 3. So it's a great credit to Scott and the operations team and the entire school district here in Indianapolis. The second recognition that I want to mention is from the Environmental Protection Agency, and it's with Energy Star. Energy Star, we're all familiar with it because we've got appliances at home with the Energy Star rating. Energy Star also rates buildings, and if you're in the top 25% of energy efficient buildings nationally, you can earn an Energy Star award. And we're proud to say that there are 8 buildings here in IPS, 8 campuses that have won the Energy Star recognition, and we have many more coming. So national recognition from the Department of Energy, national recognition from the Environmental Protection Agency is fantastic. And just one last thing, Scott and I virtually attended a summit this summer hosted by Department of Energy. And during the summit, they recognized all the award winners, and Scott was the speaker in the education section for higher ed and for K through 12. And he said something that I thought was very meaningful. I think it was his old wrestling coach background that was coming out. He said, "We're very proud, we're pleased that we've achieved a 26% reduction in energy consumption, but we're not satisfied." And he went on the record in front of Department of Energy and committed. He said, "We're going to get 20% more in the next 2 years." So that's our goal, that's our rallying cry, and that's what we're going to try to achieve. So we're going to try to live up to Scott's expectations. So with that, I have two trophies that I'll present to the superintendent and the board, or I'll leave. The first one is a crystal from the Department of Energy, and then the second one is a similar crystal from EPA and Energy Star. So with that, thank you for the opportunity. We're very excited about the success of the program.
I will say on the record too, that the Department of Energy Better Buildings Initiative is a commitment to reduce 20% over 10 years. So we did 20% in 4 years.
Wow.
So that's
Great.
very, very proud of our team. We have some of our energy specialists here tonight that work hand in hand with our school leaders. If they would stand up, we have John Chenoweth and it's Timo, right? Timo, yeah. And Timo, I don't know his last. I don't know his last name. Hey, they're the boots on the ground at the schools making it work. So, all right, thank you very much.
Great work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hall, for being here. Thank you to the Synergistic team.
If I can jump in real fast, I'm sorry to interrupt, Scott, and I want to just acknowledge, I had the opportunity to connect with a few students from Shortridge High School over the last few days, and one of the questions, I mean, they were incredible questions, they were just drilling and grilling, but one of the questions that was phenomenal was, what is IPS doing and how is IPS thinking about sort of energy, sustainability, and, we talk about being as green as we possibly can be, and so I think this is phenomenal. I would encourage, if it's possible some way or somehow, to how do we share this? This is a big deal, and how do we share that with our students that are definitely thinking about the future and sustainability and things of that nature? So
we are just scratching the surface on sustainability. We haven't even gone into that yet. So far, it's just been by mostly mechanical manipulation, shutting stuff on, it's not running, or turning the temperatures back. So that's the next step, that and behavior modification, just getting used to shutting the lights off when you leave, unplugging something that when you're going home for break. Those are the types of things that are going to get us the next, what did you say, 20%? 20%. 20%. So that's what's going to do it. But we're going to have to invest at some point in more efficient fixtures, LED lighting versus fluorescent. We have very few LED lights in this district. These are all LED, but you go to a school, most of them are still fluorescent, using a lot of energy, and they have a lot of flicker, which is not good for students that have susceptibility to autism and seizures. So LEDs don't have that. So it's both a health benefit and a environmental benefit. So those are things that we really want to get through. I love solar. I love wind. I love all of that. Geothermal. I've put in 13 school geothermal systems in my career. And I love those types of programs that help us drive our costs down.
Great.
Commissioner Arnold?
Just want to give you kudos as an individual who was on the board when we undertook this work. I know there was some skepticism and some people weren't sure it was a good way for us to go or it wasn't going to cost too much. So I just want to say how much I appreciate all your work and that, you know, sometimes we do have to make decisions that everyone doesn't agree with, but ultimately many of those decisions pay off for our district and ultimately for our students. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, Dr. Hall, for being here. I'll move us to our first official item, which is item 6.01, which is our monthly school spotlight. So I'm very pleased to welcome the very proud principal of Center for Inquiry School 27, Brandy Herbert, to come and share about the start of this school year at CFI 27 and the wonderful things happening in that school community.
Right, thank you. So first, I just want to say thank you to Superintendent Johnson and the IPS board members, members of the executive leadership team, also to my EDS Troy and to Leela for your support and encouragement and for allowing me to share with you today. I am Brandy Herbert, proud principal at CFI 27. I am in my 17th year of education and my 5th year here in Indianapolis Public Schools serving as the principal. My assistant principal, Ms. Tiffany Robinson, is seated in here as well. Please wave back there. She is in her 11th year of education and 4th year in this district serving with me as assistant principal at 27. And I do want to give a shout out that recently she was one of 10 educators selected to serve on the Aspiring Special Education Leadership Institute with the Indiana Department of Education. So it is always a proud joy to learn alongside her and with her. If you look at the board, you will see those are our students. We are very excited to be back into learning. We currently have 112 students learning virtually. That is 26% of our enrollment. We are excited when we came back on the 5th. We used that as what we called our soft rollout. So we got an opportunity to begin implementing some of the strategies and systems we put in place. Many, if not all, of our systems in the building were recreated in order to start with a proper social distancing and safe entry back into school. That includes our car rider line, that is our one-way hallways, our use of the cafeteria for a grab-and-go breakfast, use of desks. If you can imagine, our students had never sat in a desk before, so thank you for supplying desks for us, and recess. So that first week back, our team was able to implement a lot of structures in place with our students, but it gave us a chance to also refine some of our protocols and process. So when we opened with the bigs, so a K-8, you have littles and bigs in your building, and when the bigs came back on 10/19, we did recognize that we needed to do small implementation changes. We moved our car rider line and we moved our walkers to a different door for better social distancing. We recognized we needed to make sure all of our teachers had dual monitors because we are proudly currently at 27 ensuring that we are doing face-to-face learning while simultaneously doing concurrent learning virtually. So today, for example, while we had some classes that had 4 students or 16 students, we had 20 students logged on at home live while teachers were teaching both at the same time. And you can see in here that our teachers were creative with ways that they've created individual student bags or little pieces of kind of a cubby to make sure that our students' items are not commingling with other items. So it was a great welcome back, and thank you for that time to start with the soft rollout to make sure we are ready on the 19th. I do want to share with you today a little bit about just who we are at CFI 27, inform you of some of our instructional initiatives, share with you our race and equity work, highlight our social and emotional learning, and just celebrate with you what it means to be a CFI 27 Tiger. CFI 27 is the third of 4 CFI schools to open in IPS. We have a 25-year rich history within the district, and we are an international baccalaureate school. I'll refer to that as IB. We offer both the primary years program, that is our program for our K through 5 students, and our MYP program, middle years, and that is for our students grades 6 through 10. So they do 3 years in our program, grades 6, 7, 8, and if they continue on to Shortridge, they finish that program in grades 9 and 10. And I'll talk a little bit about what that program means educationally and academically in a little bit. We currently have 495 students in our building. That is a 23% increase in the last 5 years. We have 63 staff members, 75% of which have been hired by the current administrative team. And we created an administrative pipeline in our building with 1 assistant principal and 2 department heads to be ready for when educational leadership positions open in our district, to ensure that we are constantly making sure we're giving back to our community and education by having people be able to fill those vacancies within our district. We are proud that we are an inclusive and equitable program, and we serve 24.6% of our student body under a special ed umbrella. And I'm proud to say that while we are one building, you might not know that while we host a elementary and a middle school, we also have 2 life skills classrooms, 1 speech pre-K classroom, and 2 pre-K classrooms. So we are daily running 5 programs in one building. Okay, so let's talk about what it means to be IB. And I could talk all night, but I only have a few minutes, so I will try to be brief. We have a strong partnership as a CFI. Principal Hunley, Principal Collier, and Principal Miller and I all agree that we are one program across 4 campuses. Our teachers work together to create programs of inquiry. That basically centers around one main ideal or theme, such as change or perspective. So if I use the term perspective to give you an idea, we want our students to understand that their perspective or the way they interpret things will shape their society and shape their world. So our teachers ensure that that theme and concept is intermittent between every subject area they study. So in ELA, we're going to look at how the narrator of a story can shape our perspective and tell a story. In an art class, which is a required class in an IB school, we're going to look at how the artist used focal lines and horizontal lines to shift our perspective into the painting. And then we blow students' minds when they go into a math class and they hear that teacher talk about perspective, and they're thinking, how does this relate in math? And we make sure they understand that sometimes you have to see 3D objects in a 2D model while you're graphing. And as we continue to talk about the idea of perspective, we break down the idea that learning can only happen in these 4 walls of a classroom or these 4 walls of a school. Learning is happening all over in a global learning center. For that reason, we know we are doing right by college and career ready in the elementary school, because with that prior example, students are already understanding that if they have an understanding of perspective, they could be a journalist, they could be an artist, and if they did well in math and understanding math and perspective, they're on their way to architectural studies where they might want to look at the city landscape of Indianapolis and decide, how can I give back and maybe join into the world of architect? I'm also very proud to share with you that we are one of the first schools that have implemented what we call the top and bottom quartile. We know at 27 that it is our job to close the achievement gap, and all schools focus on the bottom quartile to ensure that they are getting supports academically. But we also focus on our top quartile. It is not okay to have students just pass and say that's enough. They pass at one level, they need to work higher and pass at another level. So with the use of NWA that we give 3 times a year, we have fluid programming where students move in and out of a top quartile, and we made sure that we have made changes to our schedule to allow a math lab for additional math support that's either providing enrichment for those who are in the top quartile or remediation for those who are in the bottom quartile. We did adopt the ELA curriculum of HMH this year, so our teachers are pioneering for the very first year. It wasn't the easiest thing to pilot virtually at the very beginning. But now that we're in quarter two and we're doing it in person, we have the added benefit that we are using a curriculum that aligns state standards and measurable learning objectives. And the added lift of a CFI teacher is to now turn that into a global focus in the example that I gave you about perspective earlier. So we are continuously making sure that we are hitting all the benchmarks on a state standard test platform, as well as making sure we turn that into an IB platform. So thank you for providing that resource for us and for our teachers. We also believe that we need to teach the whole child. I am proud to say that we offer very many opportunities for students to be part of clubs. And if you have played a sport before, you know that it is a lot to be great at one sport. If you are a two-sport athlete, that's amazing. 3 sports, I don't know how you do it. But in a K-8 building, when we don't have that great number of students, we are able to put on every year multiple teams. So most of our students are 2 or 3 sport athletes, in addition to being IB scholars. And then we offer many clubs. The clubs you see listed here are the ones that we're still continuing virtually. So it's very cute after school to see a virtual Lego club, our graphic novel club, art club, yarn club. We're still doing Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and we just started our yearbook club. And then as I talk about our growth in leadership, we have a student services team that meets weekly. We look at data, as I mentioned, with our NWA, but we also have created an outreach team. This outreach team was very important during quarantine time and in a time where we were all in a virtual setting, as that team consisting of a principal, assistant principal, social workers, a FACE, behavior adjustment facilitator, and a few more other teachers do home visits. We do home visits when we notice attendance is a chronic issue, if there's food insecurity, if there are clothing needs, or sometimes if a social and emotional need, we can just tell the family needs a visit. So I'm very proud of our leadership team and our outreach team to meet the needs of our community. We are continuing the work with an IPS for our racial equity team. Our racial equity team had 5 members last year, and it has grown to 13. It is always nice when more members of our school take an initiative and an interest and decide they want to be part of a team. We are using the equity leadership, our literacy framework, and studying our case studies to identify bias and inequities and brainstorm and craft our action plans, as led by Dr. Pat Payne, making sure that all of our teachers go through racial equity training. We've taken on the added lift of reading a second book, The Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, as that's added some of the neuroscience research to offer additional innovative ways that we can ensure that our lessons are culturally responsive. This is always aligned with CFI vision and mission, as we have always used restorative practices because we know that it is important to build a strong community and to strengthen relationships with students and parents. For that reason, we also partnered with the Peace Learning Center. We were proud to understand that we needed to further develop our work with race and equity, and we firmly believed as a leadership team that we could not lead with case studies as led by Dr. Pat Payne until we took a hard look at ourselves as humans and educational leaders, and until we could understand or identify or communicate our possible own implicit bias, we were not going to be strong leaders. So our entire staff underwent implicit bias training with the Peace Learning Center to make sure that we were well-rounded and ready to lead the students of our future. Most exciting is our work within social emotional learning, and I stand here proudly to say I do think it is what makes 27 stand out from any other school in IPS at this time. I need you to understand that social emotional learning is not a first-year journey for us. If I can take you back to 2017, 2018, our school-wide goal was that 90% of students would recognize an adult in the building that cares about them. We were able to meet that goal. The next year, we anticipated that we would need to understand that students needed to self-regulate. So we addressed a goal that said 80% of students will be able to identify a zone of regulation. The first bullet point you will see there is that we are operating a fully inclusive WIN room. It is a sensory room that stands for whenever or whatever I need. Anytime a student is feeling dysregulated or having a bad day, or a staff member, they're able to go to our WIN room that is fully funded by an SEL teacher from my SBA. This is an area in which we recognized that students needed a chance to put a voice to their feelings and emotions, and we used zones of regulation. It is easy. It identifies 4 colors. You are either in a blue zone, green, yellow, or red. If you're in a blue zone, you might be feeling sad or tired, and that's going to affect your day at school. If you're in green, you're calm and proud and ready to learn. If you're in the yellow zone, you might be feeling anxious or frustrated. And if you're in the red zone, you might be mad, angry, or terrified. But not every 5-year-old or 12-year-old can communicate those are their feelings. So we made sure that they had a system in place that they could identify a color to match with their tone or with their zone. Last year, we then had the school goal that 100% of staff would identify and use restorative practices to not only promote student advocacy, but self-regulation, so that they didn't have to go to the WIN room as a first sense of defense. They could do self-regulation in their classroom, calm themselves out at recess, or if they are having a disagreement with a colleague or a student, and then the WIN room became a second resource for them if they needed. Our SEL and PE teacher decided this year they wanted to create a wellness class, and our students are participating in yoga and mindful operations and ways to self-regulate and make sure that they know ways to control to put them in the green zone at all times. Our student services team meets weekly. We review the data from NWEA. We review data from our climate and culture. We review the data from our panorama surveys. We are reviewing data from our PASA polls now, and we are using every piece of this to ensure that we are meeting the needs of students, because we know that their social and emotional learning affects their academic learning. I am most proud of this fourth bullet, the DESA. The DESA is the Devereaux Student Strengths Assessment. It is a standardized strength-based behavior rating. It is a screener that will measure 8 social emotional competencies. The window for us just opened today. We finished our final training. Teachers will take about 60 seconds to rate each one of their students on these 8 competencies. If, in fact, one of these competencies shows an area for growth, it will trigger the teacher to a 72-question, 7 to 8 minute questionnaire to further analyze if a child always, sometimes, never insert the competency. We will administer this 3 times a year to ensure that we have a baseline for a way to assess students' social and emotional learning. I am very thankful to our school PTSA, who is funding the ability for us to give this screener so that we have a baseline to hopefully serve back to you as a school board and talk about how maybe this can become a practice amongst all students in our district. And last, I want to thank the IPS Foundation. We were able to receive 2 grants. We received a $1,000 grant in which we purchased books for trauma-informed workbooks. They're little 1-minute activities we can do as a bell warmer or a warm-up to make sure we are making smart decisions as we reopen school. We are very aware that we wanted and needed students to be back in the building, but even that was a change. And as change comes trauma, we needed to understand how to best meet students so that we could focus on their academic learning. And our second one was to provide swag bags. That stands for Scholars Who Achieve Their Goals, to ensure that we had math manipulatives and toys and items for learning that we could use for students when we recognized a time that we weren't going to be able to have communal items in our classroom. And I end with recognizing what does it mean to be CFI 27 Tiger. If you could just take a moment to look at the faces here on our screen, you will see that on the top left, we are very thankful that we have classes in which we are using our technology. We are projecting, the middle one, it's hard to see in the far back, but that student is working on a partnership with in our library class and downloading digital books, and so are his classmates that are on the screen learning virtually. We were learning the number 5 in kindergarten, and we are coloring that proudly and working on our kinesthetic skills of being able to color and cut. And if you look in the bottom left, you'll see that some of our teachers have also used their own money to purchase yoga mats or other flexible seating areas, so when the students just need to get the wiggles out, they can sit somewhere else besides our desks. And then the bottom corner is just our use and partnership with MLK Park, where we're fortunate to be housed next to, and we are using all ample time when it's not raining, like today, to be able to be outside for lunch and recess and our masked breaks. I'll end with this. You'll see in these photos that we are masked up and we are socially distanced, but we are focused on academics. The CFI mission statement is to develop a community of respectful, lifelong learners who use inquiry, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills to be socially responsible contributors to a changing global society. And I think we can all agree that we are in a changing global society and our students are well prepared. Thank you.
Commissioner Arnold?
Can you share information about the demographics in your school, income-wise, race, and ethnicity?
Yes, I'm sorry I didn't start with that. We are currently at 40% African American, we are 23% Hispanic, and we are at about 20% white, 2% Asian and other, and we are a Title I school. Correct. Currently, right now with our data, we are at 38.4%. You're welcome.
Commissioner Hawkins?
I'm sorry. I'm Commissioner Slack. I'm on the phone. Could you repeat that demographics again one more time, please?
Of our racial breakdown, we're at 44% African American. We are at 28% white, 22% Hispanic, 3% Asian, and it's 38% Title I.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins, you had a...
First of all, thank you for the presentation, and obviously very thankful for you and your team and the families that have maintained, like we all have, this heightened level of flexibility in this world of 2020 that we're in, so I appreciate that very much. And also just want to give kudos for the social emotional work that's happening. It sounds very cutting edge and, very forward thinking, so appreciate all those that are involved in that. So one thing you did mention, you flagged the achievement gap. And I'm curious, you mentioned sort of you're coordinating and planning across all CFI schools. It's really one school, seats across the city, which is phenomenal mindset from a collaboration standpoint. But I'm curious because I know that the IB schools are part of, I've had the chance with the superintendent and others to attend some of the, I'm not sure if you call them certification or credentialing conversations that have happened. And I know that being a part of being an IB school, you gain access to a network of IB schools and, professionals around the globe, frankly. And so I'm curious, just from your vantage point, as you think about, you mentioned some of the tactics that you're implementing to try to, close the gap. I'm curious, are there opportunities to leverage that global network? Because I think what I'm really interested in just considering is how do we continue to close the gap, whether it be 27 or across the board, particularly in some of our magnet schools. And what are we learning from that big network of schools globally on stateside and even across the state of Indiana as well? So just wanted to get your take on what resources are there for you and for the IB program in general to continue to close that gap.
Sure, great question. I appreciate the question. We do have an Indiana group that meets together. Right now we are virtually, but we normally do meet for 2 roundtables, usually housed at Shortridge. So it brings down some of our Kokomo friends, some of our friends from up in Gary, Indiana. Washington Township comes over. There's probably always an opportunity to continue to find further ways to collaborate and make sure that we're reaching for student achievement. But for right now, we focus on our practice and we focus on our assessments. One of the things that we know is that our IB assessments are formative assessments that show us where our students are learning. We are finding ways as an IB group, and especially in the Americas, where it's a little different with our studies, of how do we merge together state standards. When I travel and I meet with other superintendents and other principals looking to bring IB to their school, I'm very much forthright that you can mix a standard curriculum with IB. It is the reason that we brought HMH into our classrooms, because we know that we can target specific students that have a deficit with a state standard, and we can make sure we globally focus. So I think to your question, there is an opportunity for us to use IPS students as a bridge and a way to be the model for what that can look like as we are able to bridge both of those together.
Commissioner Moore?
Yes, thank you. I want to also thank you for coming, and I'm glad to hear that your school looks like what the district really looks like, 70% people of color. So I want to salute, I'm glad to hear that. I guess the other thing, I just wanted to give you some compliments, really. So the other thing that I'm very happy about is that your conversation around the DESSA piece of where you're willing to pilot that, try to determine if it's going to be successful. And then the key word that I heard is bring it back to IPS as best practices if it works. And so I believe that as a community as a whole, as a group of schools, if we learn to share information, we can definitely begin to address some of those academic gaps that we currently have. And I promise you, I'm very happy to hear that you're willing to test things, pilot things, and then bring them back when they're successful within our district. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any of the commissioners on the phone have any questions?
I do.
No, I don't.
Commissioner Slack, you said you do?
Yes, I do. First
go.
of all, I want to say thank you for coming. I appreciate you and your presentation. I also want to say kudos to you for saying that learning is always happening, no matter where you are. I appreciate that statement. That is so true. Also would like to give kudos out to the school for thinking about creative ways of networking and going around the whole virtual learning segment. You said that 161 of your students are online, and I think that's great, and it's a great learning curve for you. Also, I wanted to ask a little bit more about the remediation that you had in your presentation. I want to know also what kudos out to the school for thinking about creative ways of networking and going around the whole virtual learning segment. You said that 161 of your students are online, and that's great, and it's a great learning curve for you. Also, I wanted to ask a little bit more about the remediation that you had in your presentation. I want to know also what kudos out to the school for thinking about creative ways of networking and going around the whole virtual learning segment. So that 161 of your students are online. That's great, and it's a great learning curve.
I'm going to ask if I think somebody doesn't have their phone on mute, which is why we're getting a little bit of a delay there. And then Commissioner Slack, if you might text Mr. Mulholland with your question, maybe we can follow up with the question, if that's all right. I know it had something to do with the remediation, but I think somebody doesn't have their phone on mute while we're getting. I'm going to go ahead and turn that down. While we're waiting on that question, I have two quick questions for you, Vivian. What are we on? Second week back?
Third, yes.
Third week,
2
if
to
you
3.
if you count the slow roll up. What has gone better than you were anticipating, and what has maybe gone worse than you were anticipating?
Fair question and well-anticipated question. What has gone better? Student adjustment. Students wearing a mask, students coming in to sit at a desk, students coming in and having a charged device and using that device, it has been like second nature. I think one of the things I underestimated is just how resilient students are and how much they fell into a pattern, and it has been working really well. I think one of the things we were not prepared for is the fact that as an educator, you always want everything to be right and you want to be your best. And it was a lot of a humbling experience on the first day, on the 19th or on the 5th, when technology didn't work the way teachers wanted, or they didn't feel like they were meeting their best. So there was a lot of anxiety. We were in the red zone a little, we were in our yellow zone, and I wanted us to be in the green zone. And I think having an open dialogue with teachers to say, it's okay, today was a rough day. It's okay, what can we do better? Can our tech team support you? Can our social worker support you? Can I as an admin come in and model something? And for the fact that we have worked together, it's turned those moments of anxiety into positives.
Thank you. I'm going to try to turn this back up and see if we're... Commissioner Slack, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm back now. I have no idea what happened. Sorry.
It's all right. We heard the same thing 5 times in a row, I think. So you were asking a question, and then we lost you. So could you please restate your question?
Oh yes, I sure will. I wanted to know how many of the students are in remediation, and what demographic of those students are there?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I have to tell you it's in flux because it's the bottom quartile. So we actually use the bottom 25% of all of our students. So that could be 5 to 6 students in a grade level based on enrollment. It could be up to 12 students based on a grade level. So we do it by a straight demographic of the bottom 25. That does mean sometimes the bottom 25 percentile has a student that passed. It doesn't mean they're automatically did not pass. They're just the lowest 25 out of their group. For that reason, the demographic changes. It is heavily part of our SPED or ENL population that are already dual served, but it is also some of our gen ed students that just show that on that learning time, whether it's between fall, winter, or spring, as the academics improve, showed a deficit in one of the learning goals. So what I'm happy to share is that flexibility means that a student can move from bottom quartile to a top quartile. A student might move at the beginning of the year as a top quartile down to a bottom quartile, and we continue to move in flux. So it's really any and all students of all populations in our building.
Okay, and to add on to that, when you do the remediation, what kind of remediation is being involved? when you do that? Are you giving the student more rigor? Are you going back over the grade level material? What does that look like?
Yeah, good question. It's reteaching and reassessing. So it is making sure we break down the standard and we reteach where the student didn't understand it. So some of it is procedural, some of it is processing. We use a couple online tools where we can match and ensure. We use Dreambox online. We use different courses with our iRead online and Waggle. So it's different devices to make sure we can pinpoint exactly where the student did not meet academic gains based on a standard. And that's where we stand to reteach and reassess until they did it and we move on.
Awesome. I want to say kudos also to the fact that I've seen on there you had study halls and you had other materials going on, math lab. I think that's great, and even home visits, because sometimes the parents we're not able to have a relationship with a teacher, or it may be some miscommunications going on. Home visits, I think that's great. Even though we're going through COVID and everything else is going on, I want to say thank you for your presentation. It was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Principal Herbert, just doing amazing work at CFI 27. Our next presentation, item 6.02, is an update on our work in partnership with the IPS Foundation. I am very thankful for the partnership and collaboration of the IPS Foundation under the leadership of Stephanie Bailey. So I'd like to welcome her at this time to share more with you this evening.
It's so good to see faces, or at least eyeballs, right? Well, good evening. Thank you so much to the commissioners and Superintendent Johnson for the opportunity to give you an update. I think this was originally scheduled for April. Obviously, COVID had other plans for us. But the good news is I have even better information to share with you tonight as we've wrapped up our fiscal year end and start our work for this year. So just a quick reminder, the IPS Schools Foundation secures that private financial support to help you all advance the strategies and the priorities of IPS. How do we go about doing this? We have made a commitment to work in collaboration with the district leadership to make sure we really understand what are the strategic priorities that are going to require funding. Then we go out and we talk to the community. We're visiting with leaders, with business people, with philanthropists, sharing the story of what we're trying to get accomplished and inviting them to join along with us and make an investment. What I love about the way that we've constructed this model is while we're continually talking to the district partners, we're actually the feet on the street, if you will, doing the philanthropic work, which intentionally frees up capacity for the district staff. All of these fine folks and their teams have plenty to do. We don't need them out chasing grant dollars. We need to talk about what they need, and then our team goes out and pursues those dollars. And then, of course, on the back end, to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible and accountable to the funders, we monitor the implementation of those grants and ensure that everything is properly accounted for and that we're able to report back on the impact of those dollars. So how could people invest? Really 4 key ways that folks can invest in the foundation and the work of the district this year. Number 1 is through what we call major gifts. So that looks like the competitive grants that we apply for or large corporate gifts that we would secure. We're always looking to raise dollars for the annual fund. This is unrestricted. So this is where the donor says, please put this to the highest and best use. Those dollars are critically important because honestly, that's what funds us being able to run the operation. So we're always looking to solicit individual donors.
Number 1 is through what we call major gifts.
And I'm back around again. All right. We have worked this year to secure sponsorships and support for the Hall of Fame event that will happen tomorrow evening. And last but certainly not least, really proud of our ability to partner with the district and open up the Education Equity Fund. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It's received tremendous support from both individuals, corporate donors, employees. I want to thank all of you, the commissioners, the ELT staff members who are here in the room. We had 100% participation in donating to the fund, so thank you very much for that. So when we think about what did we raise dollars for this past year, as I said, we made a commitment that we were going to be aligned with the district's strategic plan. So the key dollars that we were raised were really in 3 main areas: preparing and funding post-secondary readiness, doing some support of talented educators. So that looked like some investments we made in new teacher onboarding and some of the new teacher racial equity training efforts that occurred. And then organizational effectiveness. One of the examples that would roll up under that is the funding that we provided for central services staff to receive leadership development training. And you know that Ed Equity Fund has 3 different components to it. Rapid response, which allowed us to give some immediate grants. A perfect example of that is what Principal Herbert just shared with you, that we were able to fund to meet immediate needs at School 27 and about 30 other schools across the district. We supported e-learning and then have dollars available as the recovery and return efforts continue and needs change and emerge. This might be my favorite slide of the whole presentation. I am really proud to share, we've been running a different model about how we look at partnering with all of you, understanding the priorities, and telling that story to the philanthropic community. So in the last 2 years since we've been doing that, we have made a 475% increase in the contributions that have been given to the district. That means we have a whole lot more money that we can give out to you. So the next, the chart to the right shows the difference in the funding distributed. So 2 years ago, we were able to distribute about $500,000 to the district. Last year, we came just shy of $2 million. Now, you may say, well, where's the rest of the million? Because you raised $4 million this year. That's a project timing issue. So some of those grants are multi-year grants. And as the project milestones are achieved, those dollars will be released to the district. I hope to come back again and show you charts that are even higher than that. So what did we invest in when you look at that almost $2 million that went to the district? Really comes down to about 5 key buckets. We've already mentioned post-secondary readiness. We made an investment in new K-8 computer science curriculum to help ensure that the district could achieve the new state of Indiana standards that were being implemented, as well as Project Lead the Way curriculum. There have been a variety of activities in health and wellness. That's everything from supporting some of the athletics activities at the district level and at individual school levels. And also, I know you're all familiar with the Monumental Kids Running Marathon. A lot of health and wellness work is there as well. Staff professional development, really at all levels of the organization, excuse me, has been an area where we've invested dollars. And last but certainly not least, we're proud to be able to invest dollars in the racial equity work of the district. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes on the Ed Equity Fund. So again, we invested in rapid response, e-learning, and recovery and return. Most folks gave to us and said, use it within this fund however you want. We had a few folks who said we specifically want to use these dollars for technology, and we of course have honored those requests. So this chart I share because what has been so exciting about the Ed Equity Fund, unlike some of our other funds, is to watch the community really come together. And so what this is showing here is what portion of the dollars, we've raised $726,000, what portion of the dollars came from corporate donations. That's the kind of teal blue color on the right side. And then you work your way counterclockwise around this chart, and you can see that we had a significant amount of dollars come from foundations, but then we also picked up a fair amount of donations from individuals and small businesses, and then even some of the vendor partners that the district has. So we acquired about 175 new donors through this fund, and we're working diligently to inspire them to continue their generosity. So what have we done with the money? There have been several grants that have been given back to the district. They fall into, really at this point, 2 key categories. So about $60,000 has been granted out in what we're calling the rapid response grants. So we opened 2 rounds where principals or their staff could apply for a small grant. And then we also made that available to central services teams that may have had some immediate needs. And then really the bulk of the funding has been to support e-learning. That kind of breaks down into 2 areas. One was an initial investment in 1,500 Wi-Fis, and then the other was a pretty significant investment in professional development to train our K through 2nd grade teachers on teaching on new iPads. Last but not least, we're very excited to have a whole list of sponsors on the screen. We've spent some time, Kelly, my teammate, who's here with me in the back, really headed up this initiative to secure sponsors for an event that was going to be in person with tables and cocktail receptions and all sorts of fabulous things. And then we switched gears, of course, and have shifted to the virtual event. And we're really thrilled that the sponsors have remained committed and said we want to be a part of what the district is doing. Sure, you can count on us. So please join in tomorrow night. So that's what I have to share with you tonight. We really do believe that the district is positioned for accelerated growth. We are right here alongside of you. Actually, earlier today, had a great conversation with Superintendent Johnson and her key leaders around continuing to make sure we understand the areas of funding that are needed, and we'll get to work and go secure the dollars. Thank you. Any questions?
Commissioner Arnold?
Just wanted to say how proud I am to serve as the board's liaison to the foundation and how busy they are. I mean, there are things going on all the time. And also, having been on the board for a while, have witnessed the transition of the foundation from what it was years ago, where it just merely did the Alumni Hall of Fame, to now becoming
Commissioner Gore?
the major
I
fundraising.
don't have any questions, Stephanie, but I do appreciate your work. It seems like it was just
So anyway, very proud to be part of it for at least a couple of more months. And thank you for all your work. I know how much effort goes into it, and it is a daily get updates on. They're always out there looking for money and bringing more money in, and how valuable that is for all of our students. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Gore, I'm sorry, I don't, we're having our technical difficulties, but you were in the middle of saying something, so I wanted to come back to you. Or not. Commissioner Hawkins, I'll try this.
We'll wait a few seconds before. Well, Stephanie, thank you for the update, and congratulations on the success. We've met a few times and kind of talked, and you've shared a little bit about what you hope to accomplish. So, if we had, we can always wait a little bit later to meet if that bar keeps growing. I know you wanted to share that update in April, but just great job to you and the team for what you've been up to. And also just, want to thank the partners and supporters and contributors of that, because that's what makes it go in support of the great work happening at IPS. And also I wanted to flag what Commissioner Gore, I believe, made during the consent agenda, lifted up the law enforcement study in partnership with IU. And I understand that the IPS Education Foundation is funding that study. So, I mean, in alignment with our racial equity work, I think that's incredible. So thank you for supporting that assessment.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you for your great work.
All right, thank you.
Phenomenal stuff. Commissioner Slack, hang on one second. Stephanie?
Stephanie, I want to also say thank you for all the work you've done, especially with the e-learning. I think we did a great, excellent job with that area. And also when talking about health and wellness and the racial equity piece, I just want to say kudos to you and thank you for your team for all the work that you've done. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Gore, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you, Commissioner Gore.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to thank Stephanie for all her hard work. She's done such a great job as well. I agree with Commissioner Slack with the e-learning. She just came right there with COVID, and our children have benefited from it. So thank you, Stephanie, for all your hard work you and your foundation do. Thank you.
I also had a quick question for Stephanie. This is Commissioner Slack.
Hang on, she's walking back to the podium right now. Go ahead, Commissioner Slack, I'm sorry.
I was going to go. Quick question. I just wanted to know how you balance the whole mix of private funding and the community support overall. how you juggle that? How does that work out for the foundation?
So meaning who we are focused on soliciting from? Help me understand a little bit more so I can answer correctly.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, yes.
Sure. So overall, our strategy, once we understand what's important to the district and what the district needs funding for, then we start taking a look at where might be the best place to secure that funding, who is interested in this type of work, who do we know wants to make an investment in it, where do we already have relationships, et cetera. So I would say that we don't really prioritize securing one type of funding over another, but rather we're always trying to figure out what is the fastest, most efficient way to find someone who is interested in investing in whatever that immediate need is of the district. The majority, I will say the majority of our donations come from corporate partners or the large competitive grants that we're securing. We have a smaller base of individual donors, although part of the work we're really trying to focus on this year as well is growing that individual donor base. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Slack?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, now I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. Item 6.03 is our quarterly finance update. So as the commissioners know, each quarter Weston provides an update on our fiscal landscape and where we currently are. So I will turn it over to Weston for that presentation at this time.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. Good evening, commissioners. This presentation is over the last quarter, which really is the fruition of a lot of work done over the summer and also an update to what we talked about in August. We'll review cash flows, cash balances, our supply diversity spend, give you some budget updates on the current year, and then future planning considerations. And then also a lot of the impact of the last quarter is obviously through the COVID-19 response that we've had as a district for our students. I also want to highlight again where you can find more information about our financial records. They're at the myIPS.org finance page, and you can click the link right there in that deck to find out more about our finances. First slide I want to focus in on is the cash flow for the beginning of the year. At 6/30/2020, we had $96 million across our funds that are board appropriated, our education, our operations, our rainy day, and our operating referendum fund. What you'll note is that, again, reminder, this is a 9/30 perspective, and we do not receive our property tax payments until December. And so what you'll see is some negativity on the balances, naturally, because we do not receive revenue in these 3 months for property taxes. The second thing I want to highlight is in the operations row, and there's a column called transfers. Back in 2018, we issued some GO bonds, and some of you may remember that. We issued those for reimbursing expenditures that we had for our high school reinvention and for some technology purchases at the time. Because of the tax-exempt nature of those bonds, we had to do some accounting, make sure that we have all our records ready to go, our supporting documentation, so that if we were audited by the IRS for those tax-exempt bonds, we would have that in order. We have to do that before 3 years, and this is the quarter when we actually did all that reconciliation, and we transferred those funds from the GO bonds back into the operations fund where the original expenditure was had. So it's not revenue, but it's bond proceeds that we received a few years ago, and we've reconciled our payments, and we've transferred money in. So that's helped our cash flow in the board operated fund, the operations fund. Most of the cash flow considerations that you're going to see in this report relate to the COVID response. And so a lot of the decisions we made in June, cash flowed in July, August, September. So a lot of decisions on technology in April, May, and June, but we actually paid for it. And so you'll see the cash flow in these reports to show in the last quarter. Big item for this slide as well is that we want to make sure we manage our cash balances and that we always have adherence to our board cash balance policy, which at this time, still we adhere to that with a 19% across all those funds, almost more than 2 months worth of cash. The slide with the colored bar chart is if you drill deeper into the spend of those 4 funds, we are in line with budget. So we have a budgeted amount for the quarter of about $98 million. We've spent about $97 million. This is up from the prior year. Again, we have COVID response. We have additional salary adjustments and compensation adjustments for teachers and staff. The next slide is a projection over the course of the full 12 months of the school year. So we previously just looked at the first 3 months, but this is looking out, okay, what's going to happen over the course of the 12 months? There's a lot that could happen, maybe happen, but this is our projection right now. What we have is $96 million at the beginning. At the very end of the year, we project about $72 million. Again, above that threshold of our cash balance, a little bit more than 2 months worth of cash. But how do we get there? We have our projected revenues, education fund from our state, operations from the property tax, then the related expenditures for those funds. What we also show is the operating referendum coming in and covering the costs of compensation. But I've added a line in this report for the first time because we've talked a lot about the COVID response. We've talked about the bar chart, the table and the graph about the $28 million, whatever we've been projecting out for the full year. So for the full year, we're projecting out right now about $26 million of expense. And what you'll see there is that the revenue, the IPS Foundation has an education equity fund, which we're greatly appreciative of. We also have some reimbursements coming in from the state in their CARES money. We're projecting cash flow for this school year being about $3 million, okay? So we'll receive some more through reimbursement, we project, but that'll be in the next year. But we are projecting $26 million of spend this current year. So that's the takeaway I want to make sure you understand. Up front, we're investing, and we will be getting paid on the back end.
So that's $26 million out of our funds based on our COVID response.
Correct.
Necessities. Thank you.
Yeah. And this is a theme throughout the entire process, so just want to make sure we're capturing the essence.
Commissioner Moore has a quick question.
Okay, so the $3 million and $5 million, the $3 million is money that we have received, projected.
We project to receive as revenue from grants.
From the feds?
Education Equity Fund from the IPS Foundation, plus a portion of the governor's CARES Act money that we were awarded with the Marion County e-learning fund of about $2 million.
Okay, so what's the 5? See, I was putting the.
The $5 million is the GEO bonds that we are issuing as bonds, not as revenue.
Okay.
So the bonds will be issued. We sold them in October, and we'll have an update on that. We close next Tuesday, and those bonds will come in, and we will immediately transfer that back to pay for COVID response.
Thank you.
Yep, good question. The next slide is a slide that has been hidden down in the appendix over time. It's also been at the end of the year, here are all the funds. So we a lot of times speak to a lot of the work of just the board appropriated funds, but this is an opportunity for you to see all of the revenues and all of the expenditures historically, but also over the last quarter. And I plan on continuing to bring this before you as well, because I think it's an important slide. There's a lot of information that I think that could be helpful for you to understand how we operate as an organization. So one, it shows the dollars spent, and there's the different categories that a lot of people are very interested in over time, and they're not always just spent out of the board appropriated funds. Okay, so that's the first point. Second point is there's percentages on the right that help to say, hey, are we managing our money well? And just being able to compare ourselves against other districts, against other benchmarked organizations. This is something that we monitor to say, hey, are we way out of whack in one area versus another? One particularly that we're always monitoring is the administrative operations. Okay, that's the central office, things like that. So that's another reason why I use this slide. But for this slide, it also highlights where a lot of expenditure has been happening without much revenue. So again, property taxes not received this quarter. but a lot of expenditure for the district's quarter. So about $49 million more in expenditures for this quarter has been expended than what has been received. People wonder why we have to have a cash balance of X dollars. That $50 million outflow is why we have to have reserves. And I'm just going to say, there's two reasons why we have those reserves. One, the operating referendum passed in November 2018. And number two, we had GEO bonds set aside to cover costs for technology and equipment in 2018. That's why we are able to take that type of cash flow hit, $26 million of expenditure. We're ready for that. That is important for you to understand. That $49 million, that's real cash spent this quarter more than what we received, and we have to have balances to support that. The next slide, again, this is a slide you've seen all the time. This is the all funds. The previous slide was kind of how we get there every year. But what you see is that over three months, from 6/30, there was a cash flow. Again, property tax payments, COVID. You'll see in that that when I say reserves, that other funds line, that is where the funds for COVID have been expended significantly over the course of the last 3 months. So we will have that reimbursed at some point, but our cash balance is that $49 million down from the prior fiscal year end, 6/30/2020. Moving on to the supplier diversity. This is something I want to highlight that for this 9 months, so this is a calendar year report, so year to date, January through September, 17% of our spend is to certified expenditure suppliers compared to prior year 10%. Last month, it was actually quite low. And again, we have to kind of let the year play out of the cycle. Significant spend here in two things. One, the payments to our Powers who does a lot of the work for the capital referendum. Okay, so cash flow did not happen in the first part of the year. It happened this quarter. The second thing is when we're buying technology, which we bought $17 million worth of it, there were some big expenditures to our distributor and our service provider of preparing those computers, and that's a big spend there as well. So again, trying to highlight where we've been strategic. When opportunities arise, we're looking for opportunities to have supplier diversity and spend. As far as 2021 school year, just highlight the big themes of our school year. Highlighted very much so in the State of the District address by Superintendent Johnson last night. Our shift to one-to-one technology and connectivity, our implementing of social distancing and return to work guidance in our buildings, in our buses, and also launching virtual learning and learning hubs with the intent to return to in-person learning. Those are the themes that I've captured on our budget. But last time when we talked in August, there was a lot of what ifs, maybes, outstanding funding considerations that we had to, trying to project out. And a lot of that has resolved itself over the last 2 months since we last chatted. So I want to highlight a couple of those items because they're shoring up the revenue. What are we projecting on revenue? It's shoring up because of decisions that have been made. So on the federal side, we have a decision about how much we would share with the non-public schools. There's also the governor's grant that has been awarded to us. The state funding, there was a decision about when is the ADM count. That's something that was decided this past 2 months. Local funding impacts from our real estate property tax value. That is certified for 2021, and there's more details in the appendix on that slide. And it went up about 4.5%. That's a good thing. But over the course of long-term time, we're really monitoring that because there's a lot going on in the Center Township downtown area that could impact that. And lastly, later tonight, a public hearing about our additional appropriation to pay for our bonds that we sold last week or 2 weeks ago, and we'll close next week. So a lot happening. You can see the interest rate, 0.725%. Great rate, very competitive, and glad we went to market in the way we did. But outstanding still, there's still some questions out there, some big questions. One is FEMA. So We submitted our application to FEMA on Friday. So this past Friday, we clicked the button, we submitted. Actually got a call at 5 o'clock tonight from the guy who's reviewing our packet. So they're there, they're reviewing our packet. Asked for a timeline, what do you think the time frame is? No clue. So again, opportunity though that we have a name, we have an email address, we're going back and forth and starting to process our application. We are hearing that some districts in the state have received awards and also payment already. So, that's changing my tone about the time frame of when we would receive these funds. But also there's a lot of questions about what's eligible. Okay, so you might have read about that. There's a lot of dollars spent, but what's eligible to be reimbursed? And so a lot of questions on that. Second big thing that we have to be concerned about and be watching and advocating for at the State House as legislative session starts is virtual funding. The State Board of Ed made a decision and firmed up the fall count, so for 100% if you're virtual or in person, no questions asked. But they haven't firmed up the spring. So the February count, a lot of questions going to be about what's a virtual student, what's the definition of that, who's that apply to, are we going to fund it 100%? Is there going to be funding to fund it? Those are a lot of the questions that even for this school year, there's a revenue consideration that is unknown. And then also, as we see with Stephanie and talking about the IPS Education Foundation, some considerable interest of partners and collaboration on what is it that we need to serve students, and hope that we can celebrate that tomorrow at our Hall of Fame. Couple items on the federal side. We talk about CARES Act. The update here is that US DOE legal action was resolved related to the calculation of non-public school distribution. The impact to IPS was that we were potentially going to only have $11 million available. Now we will have $14 million available. So that's a positive, and wanted to update you on that. The second one is that Governor's Relief Fund awarded Marion County an $11 million allocation of the $61 million that the state had. We had asked for 17 as a collective group of county school districts and charters. We were awarded $11.5 million. Of that $11.5 million, $2 million of it was awarded to IPS LEA, and another $600,000 to charters within the IPS boundary and within our innovation schools. It is restricted for the use of technology and Wi-Fi hotspots. This is not unrestricted money. It was a competitive grant for a specific purpose. So I want to make sure you update on that. The next couple slides are updates of what you've seen in the past couple months with the work session in September and August. Again, $26 million broken down by a pie chart, most of it through e-learning devices, facilities, and transportation. No significant changes there. And then also in the table, we highlight again the total spend and then the different breakouts of who and what dollars might be coming in as inflows. Key takeaway here is that this is upfront money reimbursed or revenues later being received with a net cash outflow over the course of the school year of about $6.6 million. The next slide is a slide you've seen many times. We saw it last in August. Just highlighting again, the status of this slide would be that it's not fully resolved. I just mentioned that February 2021 student count is still up in the air and needs to be resolved. If it's not resolved, I think there's a significant consequence on the revenue side for IPS. Next slide is a slide that, sorry.
Commissioner Moore has a question.
I just, on the nursing, what slide are you on? Number 12, on slide 12, the nursing $702,000. Is that for IPS to bring in nurses to our schools for the children during COVID? Is that what that's for? Additional nurses to be brought into our schools?
So I'll maybe defer to Mindy on the exact spend on the nurses. What we originally intended was to hire part-time contracted nurses to be on the ready, on the call, to be supporting the COVID response that we're going to have as a district. This is above and beyond the normal spend of nurses within our district.
Right, that was my question. My question was, were we bringing in additional nurses to assist us in our schools due to COVID?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
And to add to that question, Commissioner Slot, how many nurses did we add to our school system?
Dr. Morgan, Health Services sits under Dr. Morgan's team, so I'll ask him to respond to that.
Yes, we had 8 nurses before we responded to this, only 8 per the district, and we were able to outsource to have nurses provided at all of our schools. So we have coverage at all of our schools. And to give you that specific number of, I can have that in a moment for you, of the specific number that we added. Some of the nurses are sharing between different buildings, but all of our buildings are covered. So we went from 8 to having all of our buildings covered. And there were about, prior to the school year, there were 20 or so schools that did not have coverage, and now all of our schools do.
So just to add a little bit of context to that, 8 districts who are 8 nurses who are district employees. We have a number of partnerships with Shalom Healthcare and other providers who also were providing nursing support in schools. But even with those partnerships, we had about 20 who did not have on site a nurse. And so now with this additional investment, we have those nursing services at least part-time across all of our buildings.
Commissioner Slack, did that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Commissioner Gore,
Please go ahead, Commissioner Gore.
to that question,
Are you still there, Commissioner Gore?
yeah. I just wanted to know, we have nurses and we have new, but are they full-time? Are they doing the coverage that we need for cases that might break out? Or are they part-time? And who does have full-time nurses? Grade school, the elementary or high school?
Dr. Morgan, did you capture that question?
I did, and to answer that, well, first on the number, we have 26 that are contracted out, and we had 8 that are full-time. In terms of the hours, even up for our contracted nurses, they are there during the full time of the school day, unless they're being shared between the building. But we did add on 26 partnerships so that the buildings could be covered. Did that answer the question?
Commissioner Gore, did you hear that answer? Technology, we love it.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Arnold?
On transportation, I know we had talked about a significant investment in hiring bus monitors. Is that what this relates to, or is this a different expense?
Yes, bus monitors.
This is about, because I wanted to say, I remember it being like 2.3 million or something, investing and putting a monitor on every bus, and that's
Correct.
That's included here. Thank you.
Carry on.
In closing out this slide, we typically talk about this as when we're going to legislative session, we have to remind ourselves we're still receiving 1.5% less per pupil this year than what we were receiving in 2010 and 11. That's typically my slide highlight there. But as we go to the legislative session this year, we have to remind ourselves that over the time, and this is a picture of the last biennium budget, what this is showing is that the higher poverty districts are receiving a lesser percentage increase from the district, from the state. And the lower poverty districts are receiving the higher percentage increases. It's an inverse relationship between the need, in our opinion, and the funding model. So this is not just the last biennium budget. This has been happening for a few of those biennium budgets. As we have an opportunity to advocate for equitable, fair funding for our school, this is a slide hopefully we can share, and we have shared, and just show this. If this continues, it continues to put us at risk of having our programs funded at the level that's needed to support our students. And speaking of students, we have our enrollment certified in October. The enrollment for 2020-21 school year as of September is 31,171. This is the number of dollars that will be, the dollars will be based upon that number flowing through IPS. This is a number that's about 3.7% less than prior year. More importantly, it's a figure that's 6% less than what we had budgeted. So that equates to about $15 million of less money coming into our district because of the enrollment, the actual enrollment not hitting budgeted amounts.
Commissioner Collins has a quick question for you.
Weston, so 31,171 enrollment will be counted for our, will be paid for next year, correct?
31,171 will be what this school year will be funded on.
This school year?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was the following year.
Now, this is the 2021 school year's enrollment.
Okay, so was this from the September ADM?
This is from the September ADM, correct?
And do we know what happened to the other 1,500 kids or so?
So there's a lot of mobility and movement within districts. There's a number of housing shifts, job shifts that are happening in the COVID space. This is something that I think Superintendent Johnson and others have been prepping a briefing for the board about enrollment and the shifts that have occurred. Right now, it's a lot of data analysis. Right now, we know that there's certain grades levels that shifted significantly than was budgeted. And this is something that also, if you were in person versus virtual, that may have had a shift as well. But right now, a lot of analysis going into that in preparation for briefing the board.
So are you saying that the virtual are counted differently than the in person?
For the September count, no.
Okay, all right.
Patrick Harrow, who leads our enrollment team, will bring a presentation to the board next month as we're getting all of our numbers finalized. I will say preliminarily, one, we are not an anomaly in terms of decreased enrollment. So across most Marion County districts, all but one that I can think of that I've talked with my colleagues have also experienced an enrollment drop. We're seeing that play out in the national landscape in a number of urban districts as well. So I do want to sort of note that this isn't actually an anomaly that's unique to just IPS. The second thing that we are hypothesizing and that the numbers are starting to bear out a bit, which also follows a trend, is lower kindergarten enrollment. Obviously in Indiana, it's not mandatory. And so the hypothesis is that some families just said during this point in time and what's going on with COVID and all those things, we're just not going to actually start our formal K experience this year. So again, working to get some data to see if those hypotheses bear out, but that's what we're seeing and hearing is also trending statewide and nationally.
I would also point the kindergarten, not a surprise, pre-K, if you followed the state's enrollment in pre-K, to call it a drop is to underestimate it. It's a precipitous drop in participation in pre-K program, 3- and 4-year-old pre-K. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Weston, for at least what you've presented so far. I know there's still more on the road here, but the $15 million is an annual assumption, right? That doesn't assume that and cover or create room for the potential for a spring uptick when we count in February. So that's just assuming that we hold steady throughout the entire year, right? Is that okay?
That is correct.
All right.
Yep. Lastly, this is
Commissioner Collins has a question.
Will the February count for ADM, why did they do that? Does it not count for anything for
The legislators have sort of changed it every couple of years. Sometimes it's counted and sometimes it has not. It counts now. So
Okay.
you can imagine a scenario by which our enrollment for that second count is increased that will impact funding.
Okay.
the big question is what is happening in February? What choices are families making? Are we in school? Are we virtual? That's still a big question. That also, to your question around virtual and in person, the legislators resolved that for this point in time, this first count. It is not resolved permanently and could still certainly be an issue once we get to February and get to the legislative session. So that is still an outstanding issue that has not been permanently resolved.
Commissioner Arnold?
Just clarification back on the issue with the potential that we lost kindergarten children because it's not mandatory, that if those children don't come and then show up as first grader, we're going to have a whole lot of first graders that don't have the basic skills that they would have learned in kindergarten.
That would be the presumption. Same issue with pre-K being low and what happens for students starting for kindergarten. So I think, in conversations I've been in, again, here locally, but then, with superintendents across the country, this is going to be a challenge we're going to have to think about and work to solve for many years. This is not going to be, COVID happened in 2020 and that was the end. There are very
Ongoing
much,
ramifications.
yes, lots of ramifications.
Hawkins?
Yeah, and one more thing I just would lift up here too is that when you look at the previous years, that also included turnaround schools, and I'm not sure, I know those were in the gross number, but that has changed, right, with the shift with those 3 academies. And so I just want to acknowledge that I don't want to say that the previous years somewhat seemed to kind of gross the number up, but when we look at the change of 3.7%, that 3.7% change included schools or students that may have lived in IPS buildings, but were not counted in the IPS ADM as well, right? Is that a fair assumption to say or make?
So the turnaround schools have been included in this
included in
number, and that's a number that but they sometimes show up on our reports,
Yeah,
and sometimes they don't.
Okay.
It just depends. So are they in our ADM? They're in our ADM report, but it's not something that we actually get the money for.
Yeah, it's not even a
separate
pass-through,
IAs.
if I remember that correctly. It's not even a pass-through, correct?
No, it's
Yeah.
withheld from
Right.
our
It's
ADM.
not technically unfair to, if you look at 2019-20, if you took 1,400 out, we're actually flat relatively.
I think that would be fair to say.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry.
But
Yeah.
But that's a good point, Commissioner Hawkins.
But I think that, sorry, we're not having sidebar here. No, but I think that gets to the point about, really digging into understanding the mobility, not only related to COVID, but also, I'm really curious about, how Manuel and Donna and really sort of where students went, because we can't forget back in March of 2020 when the world was different, or February or January, not only the pandemic's impact, but also the coordination and cooperation from all parties involved, especially, anyway. It wasn't as smooth as we had hoped it would be for families. So we know that has played into that. So I'm looking forward to that update, certainly to see how that piece evolved.
Continue to carry on.
Again,
Excuse me, Commissioner Slack.
Go ahead, Commissioner Slack.
I had a question about the slide 12. When it talks about IPS will need to continue to fund expenditures up front for reimbursement for the next 1 or 2 years. Above that, it talks about how the federal funding that we got uncovers 75%. So there's 25% out there floating that we haven't covered. Is that what it's saying on that slide?
what we've projected is about $2 million being received from FEMA. Not all of these funds, not all of these expenditures are going to be eligible FEMA expenditures. But that which is deemed eligible at some point in the future, which is an unknown, whatever is deemed eligible expense is reimbursed at 75%. Therefore, IPS still bears the cost of 25% of that expenditure, but that is a federal statutory, that's how FEMA works. 75% of eligible expenditures are reimbursed.
Did I answer your question, Commissioner Slack?
Yes, thank you for that clarity. I appreciate that.
As far as some of the decision points going into this school year and the future, we've highlighted a number of those in the questions already that you've raised. A couple I'd want to highlight is just the strategic priorities that we have in place for 2025 are really critical as we go into addressing revenue shifts and making decisions on the expenditure side. We've staffed up for 33,000 kids. And as far as strategic priorities, the rigor of instruction, the racial equity, the community engagement, we have to fund sustainably. And at some point, those strategic priorities are really critical. So, we've got those set up as a district, and that's what's going to be one of our guiding forces to drive some of those decisions. The other piece is just health and safety of our kids. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and so therefore, much of the hold harmless, even for our schools, you heard from Principal Herbert, great things are going on. They've been growing and developing, gaining momentum, and wow, COVID comes. But how does that get sustained next year, and the year after, and the year after, when we're trying to dig out of a cash flow hole that has been thrust upon us? So those are some of the key points, the priorities that we've set, and then also just the health and safety of kids. The mandates that are upon us, those will dictate some of the spend we have to do. And that is something we have to bear and work with the federal and the state and local agencies to advocate for. We need that to be covered. At some point, the cash runs out. Second thing is the technology. That is an expense that we have incurred. It will be covered by some great collaborative partners, CARES Act, whatever it is. But that is an expense that we've incurred strategically to reach kids, not just for virtual, but to teach kids. And so the build out of educational programming and curricula, that is something we're committed to, and that's going to be an expense going forward. And there's a trade-off. That those dollars have to come from somewhere. So that's one of the big strategic decisions that we've had over the last 6, 7, 8 months as a board, as an administration, in response to COVID, but also we're building out that academic framework. So that's something in the next few months and for the next year, that is going to be a big focus, strategic conversation. I've highlighted a couple of things on implemented yield positive results. Obviously, celebrating the energy management, it's been a bullet point up there for a number of quarters, but you see the results. We invest up front and we get the savings on the back end. That's the same thing we've had with many, many other general purchasing report items that are in the consent agenda. We're investing up front to save in the long run. So kudos to Scott and the energy management team. Again, I want to highlight that. We're doing the same thing in health insurance and transportation. A lot of stuff happening there. We can brief you at a later time. But again, highlight what's in development, what you'll be hearing more of in the coming days at the Finance Committee in December. Looking at transportation initiatives, not for just this school year, but also for next. I think there's a lot of opportunity we have to lower the costs, but yet provide a great service to our families. Central office budgeting process, again, addressing the needs, making sure that administrative spend is as tight and as lean as possible to continue to serve great to our schools. Then also just analyzing the results of our facilities optimization study. That's something that is in process. The analysis is underway, and we need to, we're going to be doing that over the course of the next few months with the board. So again, in highlight, we've talked about our revenue shifts. We've talked about the uncertainty. We've talked about our cost reductions that'll be in place for 2021 and also in the long run. And also just highlighting many of the areas that we still have yet this year to advocate for in the legislative session for fair, equitable funding for our kids in an economic recession and also in a health pandemic. We can continue with a question and answer or turn it back over to Commissioner O'Connor.
Any further questions? Hearing none, Weston, thank you very much. Go ahead, Commissioner. I'm sorry. I forget about the lag time here, Commissioner Slant. Go ahead, please.
Slide 16, when he talks about decision points, could you reiterate what you mean by transportation initiatives when you say that was yielding positive results? Can you explain that a little deeper, please, Weston?
Yes, the transportation initiatives that we've had over the course of the last few years are a couple. One, when we bought propane buses, new buses that lowered the operating costs a number of years ago, and we've sustained that. We've had lower fuel costs. We've had routing initiatives where we are operating less buses, which lowers our transportation spend, but it also lowers the number of drivers needed, just the cost of operating those services. We've also expanded in the last few months for COVID-related response of social distance, the walk zones, the expansion of those. But those are items that we can continue to do. We can continue to do that also as a cost-saving measure as people's behaviors and our needs around our schools need to shift with opportunities to get to school.
Mr. Hawkins.
Weston, again, I want to thank you, and I think this presentation was great. I mean, certainly there's some concerns, around enrollment. Anytime that there are those movements and shifts, that's certainly something to pay attention to and focus in on. But I just, again, beginning this presentation with, this budget was baked or adopted back in February or March or whenever of 2020, and the world changed. And, $26 million of investment and commitment to ensuring that our students and teachers and communities are safe had to be done, and you couldn't pay for it later. You had to pay for it then in order to scale up. And so, I think there's certainly, I want to reiterate that is the predominance of the lion's share of when you look at the bottom line, you look at our cash position at the moment for the year, you look at our projected cash position, that is it. And frankly, you can even tie COVID, again, to enrollment and the impact there, as we'll ferret that out, I'm sure. But just want to acknowledge that, I know, having had a chance to check in with you very often, that, you and your team and the administration, Superintendent Johnson, remain vigilant, focused on, again, if we're talking about COVID as much, we'd be talking about that curve, and that curve's still there, as we think about those big issues that are out there. So I just want to, again, commend you and Superintendent Johnson and the team for staying focused and getting us to here, because there's a whole lot that we don't know. We don't know if we're at the top or the bottom of this thing, and what we're hoping for is leadership, not only across by this board, but also leadership by other jurisdictions, whether it be all the way up in DC or down to Indiana, the State House in Indianapolis, to help us manage through this, because we're going to need support, whether we're IPS or any district or school system in the state or in the nation. We're all in the same boat. So I'm just appreciative to you and the team, how you've managed through this, because nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So just want to give you kudos for that.
Thank you, sir.
The last thing I'll say, President O'Connor, is, and I'll shut up, is just want to acknowledge that the audit committee, see, want to get to the exciting part. The audit committee met October 2nd, and I don't want to fumble this, Weston, but we met on the agenda topics that we reviewed the audit prep process for the 19-20 fiscal year. So that's underway. Some of that sort of earlier preliminary work has already begun and is underway, and thus far everything seems to be rolling relatively smooth. Also, you might recall that we shifted our process and moved to a GAAP sort of financial structure, which was a big lift for IPS that had been in process for a few years. So wanted to acknowledge that took place on the 2nd of October, and I know that subsequent conversations and a finalization of the audit will be coming towards the end of the calendar year, early 21, I believe.
Most likely January 31.
Okay.
Would be the time when we finalize.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other questions?
Commissioner Gore.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Gore.
Okay, I just had one question, and I think Commissioner Hawkins kind of mentioned it. Things that we don't foresee may come about based on the COVID. And I was thinking, what about maybe things like if we get more children coming to school on the regular rather than hybrid, we might put more children into the school from virtual. Would that increase our custodial ability to take care of the building? Would we need to then maybe add to our budget in that aspect? I'm just thinking of the unforeseen things, because the buildings are big and we'll have more children in them. Or maybe we'll have less based on what goes on.
You are right. We don't quite yet know how that's going to play out. Scott, do you want to talk about just our ability to sort of increase custodial support if needed?
Yeah, so we would pick up any additional positions through a temporary agency that we already have online that fills many of our positions at this point. So it's merely a call and some training before we put them in a school.
We're not anticipating that at this time, Commissioner Gore, but we'll have a ability to, flex and expand if needed.
Okay, because that's a pretty big job they have of trying to keep the building clean all day and keep it sanitized. So
Right.
I was just wondering if we had enough manpower to do that and do it effectively.
No, it's a really thoughtful question and something we have to definitely keep in mind.
Thank you.
Any other further questions of Weston? Thanks for the pitch for the audit committee, Commissioner Hawkins. Thank you, Weston.
Thanks, Weston, so much.
Thank you.
Item 6.04 is an update on our COVID-19 response. So you heard from Principal Herbert how they're addressing that at the school level. We specifically wanted to dig in this evening as it relates to our protocols when there is a person exhibiting symptoms or a confirmed positive case in the school so that the board is aware of what those procedures and protocols are. Mindy Schlegel, our Human Resources Chief, has been doing an incredible job supporting all of our principals these last 2 weeks when we've had all of our students back in buildings to ensure that we're executing against those protocols and making strong, clear decisions and then communicating those decisions effectively. So I will turn it over to Mindy.
Thank you so much. Good evening. I was just going to provide a brief overview and walk you through some scenarios, and then I'm happy to take any questions just as a brief overview. So just to begin with, I just wanted to emphasize how much of this work is really about communication, collaboration, and education. It's really a community-wide effort. So as Superintendent Johnson mentioned this morning, even to the media, we're so reliant on folks outside the schools doing their part. But so much of this inside of the schools is really relying on staff and families to use their self-screener and to self-report. We have all kinds of guidance from Marion County Public Health. I just put a snapshot of a sheet of paper that we both send home with families, but we also use to determine when folks come back and forth. You can kind of see from the columns. It's a complex set of scenarios. Every situation is different. So we do a lot of case-by-case talking with each other and with families and with Marion County Public Health. So lots of phone calls going back and forth and lots of counseling for each other. And the only other thing I want to just sort of stress is that it's just a significant responsibility on schools. So, we're really focused on teaching and learning, but this is definitely an added layer for all of us that we're not necessarily staffed or equipped for, and folks have really stepped up to the plate. So if you can imagine, schools are managing the symptoms of students and staff on site, deciding whether or not they return home on a daily basis, really working hard to communicate with staff and with families, translating documents, translating phone calls that they're making home on a daily basis. A lot of this is educating families, so educating them on the symptom screener, but also sort of resetting. We're all used to sending our kids home for a day if they have fevers, and we've really shifted to a world where you're home for 10 days, and you can imagine parent schedules changing at the drop of a hat. If you have a direct contact, that's a 14-day quarantine. I'll talk more about that later. But just really getting parents to understand that we're sort of in a different world right now and what that means. And schools are doing a really great job, but it has really been a huge lift on their part. And then, of course, just the tracking and reporting that they're doing. So every student that we send home, we're tracking who's home for how long, whether or not they're going to get tested. Then we're getting results back. We're checking off boxes that we've communicated with all the right people, that we're reporting up to Marion County Health, and then obviously with the district. So it's a lot of things happening that weren't happening last year. So just wanted to emphasize that a little bit. Oops, wrong way.
So there's basically three different scenarios that we're dealing with, and one is a case of a direct contact. A lot of this comes from outside the schools, so we get phone calls that say, I've been in direct contact with someone in my family or someone at a wedding this weekend. Sometimes it happens in school now that we're in sort of week 3, 4, are we back for almost 4 weeks? You know, cases, and as cases are growing in Marion County, we're seeing more of this. A direct contact is defined as spending more than 15 minutes with someone cumulatively and within 6 feet. That is a positive case. So that's an automatic 14-day quarantine, which means you're out of school or for work for 14 days. 100% of those cases, folks aren't sick when they're quarantined, so they're able to do school. They just move into remote school, and if we can manage their work virtually, we move into sort of a virtual work scenario. The only caveat to that is if you're caring for someone who's an individual with a positive, so if my child, right, was sick, I become a direct contact, I have to quarantine. My quarantine actually can't really start because I'm interacting with my child. I'm the caretaker. So in that case is really the only caveat in terms of it could be a longer quarantine until that person's no longer symptomatic. Going the wrong way, sorry. The second scenario is when we actually have positive cases. In this case, positive case gets reported to the school, and we actually work through a checklist with the school and the Marion County Health Department. So all positive cases are isolated for a minimum of 10 days. Again, if students or staff feel well enough to work or still attend school, they just move into that virtual space. We notify all families and staff in every case that is positive that gets reported to us so that they're just notified. We, of course, protect the person's identity, just adhering to HIPAA laws. And we track that data and we report it to Marion County Health Department as well. And the last scenario is probably the most common just in schools. When we have folks who are symptomatic, and if you've seen the health screener at all, you'll know that lots of common colds, symptoms are on that screener and accounts for, you know, COVID potential cases. So in this case, staff or students that start not to feel well or have any of those symptoms are sent to an isolation room. Staff are sent home immediately. And then really you have 3 choices. You can isolate for 10 days, you can go to get tested, or you can go to your physician. The only way you're admitted back to school is if you have a negative test or you have an alternative diagnosis. So I might go to the doctor and I actually get diagnosed for strep throat. Then I can come back to school, but I need to have proof of either of those 2 things. If you go get tested after being symptomatic and you are positive, then we go back to that checklist that we follow if it's a positive case. So we start contact tracing, we quarantine any close contacts, we send out a notification to our community, we report to Marion County Health, and we update our tracker in each scenario. So this is just a quick snapshot. This information is available on the dashboard, but I just put it together on one slide so you can sort of see since we've started tracking. We update this tracker every Monday by end of day for the previous week. So you can kind of see the number of quarantines and positive cases over the last 3 weeks. I'm happy to answer any questions about what we've experienced the past 4 weeks.
Commissioner Arnold?
Go to slide 5, where it talks about if a student is positive but they feel well enough they can do virtual. And it also says that also applies to staff. So if they're a classroom teacher and they are positive, but they have mild symptoms or mild issues, what do they do virtual? I'm assuming they're not still teaching their class. If they're a classroom teacher.
Yeah. Ooh, sorry.
No. I'm just trying to understand what that looks like if a teacher has to be removed for the 10 days.
Yeah, so what schools have been doing is actually, if you can imagine, teaching from home. So they actually virtually teach from home and Zoom into their classroom, or we use Teams into their classroom, and there's someone in their classroom supervising. So that might be several scenarios. A substitute or an assistant or an extra staff member that's just redeployed to that classroom to cover the supervision.
And talk to me a little bit about the substitute. How are we using a lot of substitutes? I remember at some time conversation about we were going to try to limit the movement of substitutes where they weren't moving and potentially spreading. So talk to me about what does that look like?
So they are cohorted as much as possible, so they're limited in the number of buildings that they can pick up jobs in. I will say that we are definitely struggling to fill the substitute jobs that we're experiencing. Starts out fairly strong in the beginning of the week, and it sort of tapers off, but we've also noticed a significant drop-off as the cases in Marion County have picked up. The sub pool is large enough. They're just not picking up as many jobs as we want them to. So we're trying I just had a call with our partner today, and also have talked to surrounding townships. We're not alone. Everyone's experiencing the exact same percentage sort of drop in fill rates as we see the sort of cases increase. We've done several things over the past few years to increase those fill rates. So we were one of the highest paid substitute sort of jobs that you can get in the city. That wasn't the case 5 years ago. We do a bonus or like an increased rate on certain days that we know are low. So Fridays and Mondays are always sort of the lowest, the highest number of sub requests. So sort of bookending the weekends. And so we have an incentive there. We put incentives in place for some of our neediest buildings as well. So we are looking to sort of change some of the requirements. We have actually a higher standard for actually entering our sub pool than a lot of our neighboring townships. And we discussed today sort of, we have one rate for a daily rate and one rate for a long-term sub rate. And we may come up with like a COVID rate, if you will. So there are some temporary solutions. So we did some brainstorming today too. We've also pushed down some recruitment materials to the schools. I also, I think sometimes you can recruit from your own community, in a way that's more helpful. And in which case that sub can only, sub for your building. But, it has definitely been a struggle. And we're also limiting the pool if we cohort them. So, there's only so many subs that can go to these 5 buildings. I'm sort of limiting that, but we're sort of sticking to that and trying to loosen up in other areas.
Thank you.
Commissioner Collins?
Mindy, on slide 7, it said for week 10/18 to 24, 107 are in quarantine and there's 10 positive cases. Was that all at the Brandis School that we were informed about?
No. Those are district-wide numbers.
And as far as Brandis, is that how you pronounce the school? Yeah. So it sounded like the whole school was out. So is that the state of Brandis?
Correct. Everyone at this point is in virtual learning. And so these numbers are reflective of last week. Those numbers will show up this week. Again, it's not an issue of just an overabundance of cases, but it's a small school building with a number of students who are quarantined and families who also then had their siblings who weren't necessarily impacted, but also had their sibling at home as well. And given all of those dynamics happening, the decision was made in consultation with the Marion County Public Health Department to move all grades to virtual through Friday, which is tomorrow, and then we'll reassess to figure out what the next steps will be next week.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any commissioners on the phone have a question for Mindy?
Yes, thank you. This is Commissioner Scott. I had a question, Mindy, about slide 6. I see on slide 6 it says 10 days, and then it says 14 days. Why are we not having the consistent number of days of 14 since we strongly recommend 14 days?
Can you repeat the question? I heard 10 days and 14 days. I just don't know what the question.
She's looking to slide 6.
Yep.
And I think it's the question of if positive.
Why is there a difference?
Yeah, why is there a 10, right, Commissioner Slack? It's the 10-day isolation hold.
Sorry, I know I I have a thing where you can't really hear me. But on slide 6, it says move to remote learning, teaching 10 days, and then on the slide 5, it says the same thing, but it says 14 days, what we strongly recommend.
Yep.
Why are we toggling before 10 and 14? Why is it not just all consistently 14 days?
Yeah, so the Marion County Health Department recommends a 14-day quarantine if you're exposed and a 10-day isolation if you are sick, symptomatic, or actually positive. I'm going to try and explain this, but I'm just going to say I'm not a nurse. So if you're exposed, there's a 14-day window in which you could develop the virus. If you're sick, you've already spent at least 4 days having the, I don't know what the right word is, having the virus grow or become.
Incubation period,
Thank you.
they call it.
So that is my non-medical explanation, but that comes straight from, that wasn't us, that was come straight from the Marion County Health Department.
Okay, so then kiddos can go to their doctor or something, and if they can test negative, they can come back before those 10 days. Is that what I'm reading?
That's correct. Either a negative test or an alternative diagnosis from a physician.
And so last question, Mindy, I'll leave you alone. How are we actually assessing the attendance for this when a school has to go on quarantine and our kids really are sick? How are we going to assess for that academically?
Commissioner Slack, did you say for attendance?
Yes. How are we going to do our attendance if a kiddo is sick for 14 days? Are they really going to be counted absent for 14 days?
Yeah, I will have Dr. Morgan. We have a number of different codes because of these complexities. So Dr. Morgan, if you want to address that.
Yeah, great question, and it's not a straightforward one. Basically our guidance, the way it states, is depending on if a student is really sick and they have to miss school, they will be excused absent. There's a process that we talk with our schools about how students can actually make up their work during that time.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I can't hear. Can you speak a
Sorry.
little bit louder or closer to the phone? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. No problem. So what I was saying is, in our guidance, we say that if a student is really sick and they have to be absent and they can't participate in the instructional process, that is an excused absence. And we work with the schools and the teacher to make sure that that student can make up their work. In the event a student is just quarantined, but they actually feel fine, they can participate virtually. And we do have a code in our Power School that is virtual COVID present. That's actually the code that we're using for all students that are virtual in this time. And that would count as a student just participating virtually, and it counts as present. So I wouldn't use the term as dinging a student if they're absent because they're sick. It is an excused absence. The way our state recognizes it, even our Power School recognizes an absence is an absence in terms of it. They wouldn't get marked for being present. But there are systems in place to make sure that that student does get caught up. Parents do have the choice, depending on how a student is feeling, if they can participate virtually or if they just need to catch up the work asynchronously. Did that answer your question?
It sure does. Thank you so very much.
Commissioner Gore, do you have a question?
Commissioner Gord, yes. Thank you. This might be just rhetorical, but how many parents do we think are following protocol in the morning? And how could you tell if a child did come to school with a fever? Are we checking the fevers ourselves with a thermometer when they come in?
We aren't doing.
Is there a check and balance kind of thing there, or are we just taking the child's word he got on the bus and he's evidently fine?
Yeah, so
or he or she?
Yep, it's a great question. We are not doing temp checking. We really are relying on and trusting our families that they are doing their part to make sure, one, their child is healthy when they come to school, but they're also helping to keep their classmates and teachers and staff healthy as well. So we are sending reminders to families about the COVID checklist. It's been in my superintendent's updates. It's on our website, but we are, trusting that our families are, again, this is our collective responsibility to keep our community healthy and trusting that they're doing their part. And
I might not have heard, when they do return, they having to bring a doctor's statement with them that they are now free of COVID, or we're just accepting they've been out 14 days or 10 days? The 10 days I know it's a quarantine, but 14 days maybe if they were sick or something.
Yes.
Do they have to bring a doctor's statement to prove that they're
Yes,
not showing COVID?
The 14 days is the quarantine. There's no documentation necessary to come back. It's just that you fulfill the 14 days. So we're tracking and then know that you can come back as of such and such date. If you are symptomatic, it's a 10-day, that's the 10-day isolation. You do not need a doctor's note to return after the 10 days. You do need a doctor's note or a negative test to return prior to the 10 days. So what Marion County Health Department recommends is a 10-day isolation period and then a 24-hour period where you're fever-free and improved symptoms. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Yep. Minnie, thank you for the presentation. And also just want to kind of reiterate, I think this was Commissioner Moore, your comment or question about nurses. And I know that all of us have received quite a few correspondences and feedback, and legitimately for, you know, just out of concern and hope to ensure that our kids are and staff have access to a health professional. So thanks to everyone for making that happen, because that's critically important. One maybe more of an operational question, and maybe in what I do during the day, I've gotten a chance to be a little closer to this, but you know, when a student goes into quarantine, or I'm sorry, isolation at home or quarantine, let's say they're, you know, maybe have been in proximity to someone who is maybe exposed or infected, how do we think about, just I'm curious about food service or access to technology, because we know that technology component is their gateway to the classroom. And so are we providing or are we creating an opportunity for food service to get to the kids that are no longer in the school building receiving the meals that they receive? Because I know yesterday, which was blew me away, of the 3 million meals that were served, to our community and IPS students. But just curious how we're thinking through that, knowing that we could be seeing some surges potentially coming or not. But just, I'm not sure if that's a Scott question, a Mindy question, a Scott question.
I was going to start.
Yeah.
I think part of your question was on, so for technology, students have those devices. They are actually bringing them to and from school. So conceptually, they should have that device, whether they're at home or school, and be able to access. Food service wise, and Scott, you can fill in the details. We do have sites where any student who is virtual for whatever reason can come and get their meals. We are not transporting or doing like direct household delivery, but we do have sites for students who are virtual where they can come and get meals. Scott, do you want to add any detail to that?
Yeah, so we have 10 sites across the city for families to come and pick up breakfast and meals. So when they come on Wednesdays, they pick up 5 days of meals.
Okay. No, that's helpful.
Sorry.
Well,
I was just going to pipe in that, in the Raymond Brandy situation, I finished with the health department at like 9:45 last night, and Scott and Dina, who runs food service, by 10 p.m. had decided that there would be meals at 8 a.m. this morning, 2 days worth of meals packaged and ready for any families to pick up this morning. So, kudos to them, because it was, I think when we do decisions like that for a whole school, they were able to pivot really quickly and get meals for just that school as well, in addition to all the other things that they're doing.
That's great. I think what I'm thinking about is just maybe are there opportunities to collaborate with, partners in our community? I know we were able to collaborate very well with, community centers and support centers and, folks of that nature that can maybe help us kind of with that last step, particularly if we know we have students or children that are in quarantine or isolation. Just thinking about how, I get it, if we have to pivot and go virtual for a school, we have time to plan, but just sort of knowing that there's some exposure for young people out there, knowing that the breakfast and lunch might be their primary source of nourishment. So just something to think about, and certainly if there are opportunities to collaborate with partners, it's worthy of exploration, I hope.
Commissioner Collins?
I have a question, Commissioner Slack.
Commissioner Slack, I'll come back to you. Commissioner Collins has a quick question.
Thanks.
This is probably off the subject a little bit, but how do we coordinate with the learning hubs? Do we know who's sick there, or if someone gets sick there, or can, are we in communication with the learning hubs? Are they, actively partnering with us, or how does that work?
Do you mean the learning hubs that we stood up during virtual?
Yeah, yes, for virtual learning, like the Cornerstone Church is one. No? No. What
So
was,
there were two learning hubs. So the ones that we stood up as a district where we were operating in our schools, those are no longer, since essentially we're back in person.
okay.
But I think you're mentioning, when you're talking about Cornerstone, those are some of our partner organizations. And I don't know the actual response in terms of how the food services is, because you're asking about food services for those students that
Well,
are in the learning hubs?
I'm
or
also wondering if some of our kids are still going there,
learning?
then do we track illnesses through the learning hubs too? Or if a student is sent home to quarantine from an IPS elementary, then can they go to the learning hub? And that, would not be conducive to quarantine.
Right.
Those are operated separately. It's a great question in terms of us following up to find out how those, which families are actually using those options that are available to them. Essentially, that would be, we would treat it as like a student is, attending school from home, but they will be, of course, attending from a learning hub. And I'm assuming each of those different hubs have their own contact tracing and their own protocol that they would follow. But those students that would be attending those would be our 100% virtual. So for us, we treat them as 100% virtual. But I also making a note just for us to find out in general how many of our students are actually utilizing those. I do know some of those community partners were opening those up not only just to IPS students, so there are other schools, other different networks that may have students that are 100% virtual, that those are available to them as well.
And I would just pipe in, they do have their own protocols in place. So it's a heads up to us, but they follow their own they contact a family and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Mr. Slack, you had a question?
Yes, I had a question about, I wanted to reiterate on Commissioner Hawkins when he was talking about the food services. I did read something on Marion County, and it stated that we were going to be on there for EBT for our families. Is that true? Am I correct on that information, that a lot of schools are participating in that for our parents?
Yeah, and Scott, you again might fill in the blanks here. There have been, at this point, I believe, 2 additional distributions of funding and resources in the form of the EBT card for families, and that's been actually an effort from the state. So Scott, I don't know if you have any more to add to that, but I do know we had to submit some data to the state on a pretty tight turnaround about a month or so ago, so that families could receive that additional funding for resources. Anything else you could add there, Scott?
I don't, but I can get more information from Dina Bond on that for you, Commissioner Slack, if you'd like. She's more plugged into it than I am.
No problem.
Any further questions for Mindy?
Good.
Great. Thank you, Mindy.
Oh, thanks, Mindy. And again, her team, as well as our school leaders, are just doing phenomenal work in this area. So very thankful for all they've taken on. Moving on to unfinished business, we have one item unfinished business. That's item 7.01, which is the public hearing that is required for the additional appropriations related to the GO bonds that Weston was talking about earlier. Those bonds are being used to support our COVID-related purchases of technology and additional equipment. And so this is the final board action needed to finalize the issuance of those bonds in the form of this hearing. And then we'll be able to move forward with closing on the bond issue, which is planned for next Monday, or Tuesday, November 3rd.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. Really briefly, we've gone through a process the last few months Slide here shows August, September, October. We've done a public hearing to adopt the project resolution, adopt the preliminary bond resolution. September, we adopted the resolution to actually issue them. We issued them in October 14th. And then tonight is a hearing to adopt a resolution to have an additional appropriation of $5.35 million to actually have the authority to pay for those bonds. So again, as Superintendent Johnson talked about, our technology shift, again, highlighted during the quarterly finance update. We issued them and sold on October 14th at a 0.725% interest rate, paid back within June 30, 2021. The process we have undergone to get to this spot for a public hearing is advertising a notice about this public hearing more than 10 days before. So we did that on September 18th in 2 newspapers. We're holding the public hearing tonight, and then tomorrow we'll submit the approval to DLGF. The amount, $5.35 million, were an appropriation similar to the budget conversations. Just reminding the board, it's a process to request more funds than the DLGF has already approved for this school year, in this budget year. So, any questions?
Any other questions, Commissioner Collins?
Can they actually deny that request?
You can, yes.
She means the DLGF.
Can DLGF? It's more a formality process, but yes, they can.
By the way, that is what you meant, isn't it? I didn't mean to put words in your mouth. Sorry.
Whoever DLGF is.
Department of Local Government Finance. This is essentially we've used, I'm going to give the Mike O'Connor third grade explanation.
Don't say third grade. Come on.
I did really well in third grade. We're raising money through this bond sale. We have to appropriate that money into our budget. And then that budget then has to be reapproved by the DLGF because it's over the budget that they approved that we did this process. So if the money's there, we just have to say we're expanding our budget to accept the money.
In March, this was not in the budget.
Yes. How was that? Was my third grade
received
explanation
approval
pretty
for,
good?
yeah, it was great.
That's what I need to know, because I thought we'd already approved this, and
This
already
is
talked
new.
about
This
it.
was a new ask to the markets. It's a new spend. It's a process that we need to do to actually spend that additional appropriation, additional money.
Okay, so it's a procedural thing.
This is strictly procedural.
Right. Thank you.
And so we do have to go through. Any further questions? I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut anybody off. Any questions on the phone? Hearing none. So we'll now open, we are required to hold a public hearing. We'll open the public hearing for additional appropriations related to the general obligation bonds proceeds. Does anyone wish to offer comment on the matter? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the additional appropriation resolution as presented?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Mr. Mulholland, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
Yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have one item in new business. This item 8.01 is an update on our Title IX practices and policies. Just so the board is aware, the administration will ask the board to waive our 30-day wait period because some of these updates reflect current requirements from the U.S. Department of Education. We want to ensure alignment of our policy with the requirements from the U.S. DOE. So Ahmed Young will come at this time with that update.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. The
Mr.
Title
Young,
IX
could you make sure to talk in the mic so our folks on the
Yes,
phone
I can.
Thank you.
The Title IX framework that many of us are aware of became law almost 50 years ago. And during the course of the last 48 years, There have been countless updates, amendments, changes, but the most recent change and update to the Title IX framework is probably one of the largest that we've seen in quite some time. K-12 institutions and institutions of higher learning had to examine where they've been and what they're doing and make some major changes to their policies, practices, and procedures once the new regulations were released in May of 2020 and then ultimately took effect in August of this year. And we were very fortunate because our Title IX team not only preempted, but had put in a lot of policies and practices over the last several years that allowed us to make some changes, make some tweaks, and now bring this before you so you all can hear about what we've done thus far and some of the work that needs to be done moving forward. First off, a little education on Title IX. It affects higher education as well as K-12. When we think specifically of K-12 education, the ultimate goal for school districts and other school corporations are to prevent, investigate, stop, and ultimately remedy teen dating violence and stalking, sexual harassment, gender, sexual orientation discrimination. That's the ultimate goal for Title IX. There's a lot of nuance and detail within that, but that's the overarching goal. When it comes to what the United States Department of Education has done, particularly when they released the new regulations in May and the changes that took effect on the 14th, requires changes in terminology, definitions, and processes, focused on new regulations, particularly when it came to due process rights. To unpack due process rights a little bit, I won't spend too much time on it, but it can become very complicated, particularly with these new regulations. Due process rights could include anything from appeals to having specific advocates, some attorneys, some non-attorneys advocating for the rights of students, notice requirements, and the like that comprise due process rights that were updated with this new regulation. Fortunately, like I stated earlier, there were some new regulations that came that were already in effect here at IPS and allowed us to pivot much quicker and easier when the new regulations took effect. I'll go through a couple of them very quickly. School districts required to address teen dating violence. Many of you may recall a group of students that presented to this particular body about 2 years ago and brought up the issue of teen dating violence, which impacted some of our policies within the school corporation. So dating back to 2018, we updated our teen dating violence policy. Thinking about annual training that's mandatory for reporting requirements, that was already implemented here in IPS back in 2017. Yes, we were really excited about that too. And then we also had to think about, going back to 2017, the requirements for gender-based discrimination and harassment with very clear protocols. We spelled out those protocols in a very easy to follow and easy to understand way that a social worker, a counselor, assistant principal, EDS, someone in central office could follow and execute on. And fortunately, that was one of the new regulations that came in effect in August of this year, and we were already ahead of the curve on that. When it comes to a few other policies that were updated, we embedded many of these things in the new policies and administrative guidelines. I won't go through each and every one of them, but one of the things that I think is really important to highlight is the responsibilities associated with the Title IX coordinator. We have a fantastic leader in that particular department, Ms. Kim Kennedy. She is becoming a national leader as well as a statewide leader. She sits on the ATIXA board, which is the Association for Title IX Administrators, one of the few K-12 leaders that is actually sitting on that board. We've convened several meetings right here in Indianapolis that were attracting folks from Lake County all the way down to Evansville, Vanderburgh County, just to listen to and participate in some trainings that we put together as a team. So we're also coordinating with the Indiana Department of Education on some of the things that they're trying to do, and they're soliciting insight and feedback from our particular team. So we're excited about that, and we're excited about being a leader in this industry right now. A few other things to hit on, some of our priorities. First, you look at student priorities. We want to make sure that students truly understand their rights. understand supports available to them, and engage in a process to resolve issues. One other element that's not embedded in the student section is the fact that we want students to be proactive leaders in this. Like we saw a couple years ago, we want to make sure that students are truly empowered to take the lead and bring different ideas to not only the superintendent's student advisory council, but to this body to change policy and truly be leaders in this area. Staff, it's incredibly important that they understand their responsibility to report the supports that are available and to take action to support a safe and inclusive environment for our students. And then making sure that the Title IX work is aligned with district priorities. Of course, you see social emotional learning. Another element that's not embedded in that particular section is racial equity. When we think about disaggregating data, how do we look at the data as it relates to sexual abuse, sexual violence, sexual harassment, and discrimination? We've seen national trends, particularly when it comes to situations where we have more African-American female and Latinx females experiencing these issues or these situations more than their counterparts. And that's something that we're digging into the data, and we're going to continue to invest in that. And then some of our other priorities and partnerships. We've partnered with DVN, the Domestic Violence Network, and other groups to bring programs to our students, focusing on teen dating violence, healthy relationships, athletes, as well as child sexual abuse prevention. So we're doing a lot of different things, not just reporting and following up and keeping students safe, but finding other ways to do that. And every single one of these programs that's enumerated is not coming out of the coffers that Weston just spelled out just a few minutes ago. These are all grant funded from support from not only the IPS Foundation, but from DVN, the Prevent Child Abuse in Indiana groups, and others that are donating and supporting us in their own ways. So we're really excited about all these partnerships and the work that's been done thus far. So thank you all for your time, and welcome any questions.
Any questions? Oh, Commissioner Arnold.
Comment. I think the young lady that kind of led this with the domestic violence with teen dating was a young lady from Christmas Addicts that came and spoke to us. So very eloquent. It's just an example, I think, of how young people can really take a leadership and really have an impact on something that not only maybe has impacted them, but hundreds, thousands of other students. Where she is now, I'm assuming she's moved on.
She's at Butler now, I
She's
believe.
at Butler,
Butler, that's right, yeah.
and doing
Good for
great work.
She came back and spoke once since she went to Butler. If I
She
remember
has,
correctly.
and she was, I think, up until COVID, supporting at Christmas Addicts still as well. So she's staying connected to the district, which is great. Maria.
Any other, Commissioner Collins?
I'm just curious to know, Ahmed, how are these things implemented at the high school and middle school?
In some instances, it depends on the type of program. So if you go back to the teen dating abuse and violence campaign, actually, I didn't really talk about that, I skipped over this. This is a campaign that is funded purely by DVN and in collaboration with the Title IX team and truly supported by the communications and engagement team. They're using grant funds to help address teen dating violence, and you see billboards, and you see bus trails, you see other campaign elements to make sure that students are aware of these particular issues and also aware of the supports that are around them to navigate these particular issues as well. So this is just one example, but in many instances it's proactive, but it's also reactive as well. Because if a student reports to a social worker or a counselor that they're dealing with a relationship, or they're dealing with, or they report some type of abuse, they're able to jump into one of these programs, and then you have this community that essentially puts their arms around them to support them, metaphorical arms, of course, around them to support them in navigating these issues.
I might, as a point of personal privilege, ask Mr. Young if he knows who the sponsor of the original Title IX legislation was.
The original sponsor, I'm guessing, not Birch Bayh.
It is U.S. Senator Birch Bayh. So the Title IX program has its roots in Indiana, something we should all be very proud of.
Yeah.
I'm hoping
Yes,
you weren't
indeed.
just guessing, but
Yeah.
No.
And of course, Senator Bai has reached a lot of attention because of his efforts on other issues like the Electoral College back in the day as well.
And the Bayh-Dole Act for Innovation, which was just celebrated yesterday. So we have two efforts. I'm going to ask Mr. Mullen if we can merge them into one, or do we need to waive the 30-day?
Yes, we do need to waive, but we can do that as part of a single motion, so you can.
So anyway, I'm sorry, I should ask, any commissioners on the phone have any questions for Mr. Young?
I don't have any.
Okay. So what I am proposing, if it meets the concurrence of the board, is that we would put the two into one motion to waive the 30-day rule, and the second motion to adopt the changes and amendments to our active Title IX policy. So I would accept a motion to merge the two and move.
Second.
Did you say so moved? No. Oh.
I
No.
said so.
Okay. I heard it.
Somebody else did it,
These
yeah.
masks are throwing me off. So I have a motion and a second to waive the 30-day rule and to adopt the changes to the administration's, to the IPS Title IX policy. Any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Mulholland, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
Yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 7-0.
That was all of the items that we had for you all tonight.
As we are at closing comments section, does any commissioner wish to offer any closing comments this evening? Any of the, Commissioner Hawkins?
Yeah. Again, I just want to thank our teachers, our school leaders, and I think we are still celebrating Principals Appreciation Week, I believe, right? So just want to lift them up across the district. But again, want to thank the IPS school community for, again, just your continuance to be flexible and graceful, and as we move through this unknown that is the COVID-19 of 2020 world we're in. So I want to lift that up first and foremost. And secondly, and I think just as important is what happens on Tuesday. It's just so important that this is an opportunity for us to be part of the democracy that we are a part of. And it's so important that we all, many of us probably in this room have already done so, and online and streaming have probably done this already, which is incredible. But Tuesday is so important, whether it be up ballot or down ballot, everything matters. And so this is a very important, at least from my vantage point. I'm sure everyone up here would agree that this is one of the most important ones I know that I've ever seen, and believe we think about the future of the nation and the state and the city that we live in. So again, just want to encourage all those out there. The lines might be long, it might be raining, whatever it takes to be there. But for those of you who have voted, or for those of you that have voted, certainly there are opportunities, I know, to volunteer and support the process. I'm sure there's other organizations that are part of bringing people, gathering people to the polls. But again, I just can't reiterate how important it is to exercise this opportunity on Tuesday. So just wanted to lift that up and wish everyone luck and safety and healthy safety, I guess, during that period on Tuesday.
Any commissioners on the phone have any closing comments?
Yes, Commissioner Gore. I know this is Alumni Day, and so I'd like to say yay, Tigers, Crispus Attucks, and say yay to my elementary school, which is 87. And I'd like to have everybody to stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Slack. I would like to echo the same sentiments when it comes to our leadership. When it comes to our principals, they're doing a great job. I'm talking about following procedures and protocols all day long, making sure everyone's safe and getting home safely throughout the car riders line. So I just want to say thank you for all your help and all your hard work. And thank you. Good night, guys.
Thank you. I am not an IPS alumni, but I am wearing my Thomas Gregg 3/4 zip pullover because, for two reasons. One, because they gave it to me, and two, it is in my district, and three, Corey Franklin, if you're listening, I'm missing a Arsenal Technical High School quarter zip pullover that would fit well into my collection.
Probably have it by tomorrow.
Perfect. Medium, slim fit. I want to reiterate what I've heard several of the other board commissioners. I said last night in our state of the district that our staff, our superintendent, the team, I am in awe of them, of the work they have done in incredibly difficult circumstances. Our families, I think the principal from CFI 27 talked about the resiliency of children, and that, perhaps as difficult as these times are, it will reiterate the importance of resiliency and the ability to be flexible, address changing needs, but not be shy about recognizing the challenges that were presented and the changes that we're going to have to take to address those challenges. And so I want to applaud our staff, our superintendent, and again, reiterate something Commissioner Hawkins said, which is November 3rd is pretty darned important. And if you haven't had the time or taken the time to go vote, please do. As my mother would say, vote as if your life depended on it, because it probably does. So, Superintendent.
Thank you. Very quickly, first, I just want to again thank publicly our principals, teachers, staff, families, and students for the incredible resilience and collaboration that they've continued to demonstrate as we've welcomed them back into the classrooms. We are all learning and working under ever-evolving and new circumstances, and the work of our team just cannot be overstated, the work that they are carrying every single day. I've met now once with both my Superintendent Student Advisory Council and my Staff Advisory Council, and I'm always reminded and inspired by the incredible people we have in the IPS family, and so I'm so thankful to get to be a part of this community. I also want to thank everyone who's participated in IPS Week this week. A big shout out to our Office of Communications and Engagement, who has planned and led the efforts this week, with today being IPS Alumni Day. So shout out to many board members and commissioners who are alums, Commissioner Arnold, Commissioner Collins, Commissioner Gore, Commissioner Moore. So it's great to have so many alums take part in leading our district as well. Tomorrow, we will wrap up with our expanded IPS Hall of Fame, sponsored by the IPS Foundation. And that will be a wonderful evening to celebrate incredible people we have in the district. So if you're not registered on our website, please do so you can join in the celebration tomorrow. And then finally, I just want to remind our community of the shared responsibility we all have in keeping one another safe. Our positivity rate is continuing to increase across our state and in Marion County. And our goal as a district is to keep our children safely in school as long as we can, but it will not be possible if everyone does not do their part. So please wear your mask consistently, socially distance, get tested if you seem to be exhibiting symptoms, make a plan to get your flu shot in the next couple of weeks. All of that will help us keep our students and staff as safe as possible, because we cannot do it by ourselves. And then finally, I'd like to recognize and acknowledge the death of a longtime former IPS Board of School Commissioner, Hazel Stewart. She passed away earlier this week. I did not have the opportunity to know her personally, but I certainly heard about her extended service and commitment to this district and to our families of the district. And so I just want to send our prayers and thoughts and condolences to her family as they mourn her loss. Thank you. That's all my comments for this evening.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. Our next scheduled meeting is our work session on Tuesday, November 10th. Obviously, in light of the emergency orders issued by the governor, which I think the existing one expires
Expires the 1st, so we're still waiting. I'm monitoring that to see if that gets extended.
I think, given what we're watching, we can anticipate some of an extension of that, and we will modify and adapt to whatever those emergency orders require. But having completed all items on the agenda, this meeting stands adjourned.